Title: Ashes of Us. Setting: a leafy suburban neighborhood just outside Boston. The couple lives in a two-story colonial house with white shutters, a stone driveway, and the kind of manicured lawn that hides decades of secrets. Chapter 1. The silence between them. Eleanor Warren stood at the sink, rinsing wine glasses from the previous night's dinner party. Her hands moved in autopilot, but her mind reeled. The laughter that had once echoed between her and Mark now lingered like smoke, visible only in hindsight. Mark entered the kitchen, his tie loose, eyes shadowed by a late night. He leaned against the counter, sipping coffee. "You didn't sleep," he said, voice low. Eleanor didn't answer. Her silence wasn't passive-aggressive, it was deliberate. A question left unspoken. Who was she? Mark's affair wasn't a guess anymore. A week ago, Eleanor had found the burner phone, hidden behind books in his study. She hadn't confronted him yet. Instead, she'd read the messages. Everyone. A year's worth of lies condensed into emoji-laced texts, calls at odd hours, pictures. A woman named Tess. Chapter 2. The Spark That Lit the Fuse. Eleanor wasn't naive. She knew marriages cracked in the middle, often without a bang. But the discovery still felt like impact, violent, surreal. She wasn't sure if she wanted revenge or clarity. That night, she called her sister Claire, a defense attorney known for her icy pragmatism. "Confront him," Claire said, "or track her down. Just don't play the saint. Saints get devoured." Instead, Eleanor did something else. She texted Tess. "I know who you are, and I know what you did." Tess replied with a single line. "Do." You know what he did? Chapter 3. Mark had grown skilled at lying to himself. The affair had started after Eleanor's miscarriage, a tragedy neither of them processed. He'd buried himself in work. She'd shrunk into herself. They became roommates. He hadn't fallen for Tess, not really. He'd just missed being seen. But now the dread was constant. He felt Eleanor watching him, her eyes soft but different, like fogged glass. Then came the detective, private, hired by Eleanor. He left a card on Mark's car windshield. "Call me. It's time you start talking before someone else does." Chapter 4. The Hidden Crime. It wasn't just about infidelity. Eleanor learned through the detective that Tess was not just the other woman. She was also involved in an embezzlement case tied to a consulting firm Mark once freelanced for. Her name appeared in a shell corporation. The texts mentioned moving funds and hiding traces. Eleanor started to wonder, was Mark involved? If so, it wasn't just her heart that was broken. It was the law. Chapter 5. Fire in the AE. The confrontation happened on a Thursday. Rain fell like it had been waiting. Eleanor stood in the doorway to his study, holding the phone, the printouts, her trembling. "I know about Tess. I know about the transfers." Mark didn't lie. Not this time. He sat down slowly. "It started with her asking for help. I didn't know what she was doing at first. Then it got complicated. I was in too deep. And us? I never stopped loving you, but I stopped knowing how to show it." Chapter 6. Fault lines for weeks. They existed in the same house but in different dimensions. Eleanor vacillated between rage and numbness. Mark tried to explain, justify, apologize. Their couple's therapist, a soft-spoken man named Jonah, asked them both the same question. If you could go back to the moment everything started to unravel, what would you do differently? Mark said, "I would have asked for help." Eleanor said, "I would have listened more, and I would have made him listen back." Chapter 7. Choices. The detective found no hard proof Mark was directly involved in the financial crime, but Tess was arrested. Her cooperation could change everything. She had leverage, the texts, emails, timestamps. Mark might still go down with her. Eleanor had a choice. Hand the evidence to prosecutors, or bury it. And Mark? He had to face the truth that loving someone didn't erase betrayal. One night, Eleanor drove to the river, took the printed emails, and stood at the edge. She didn't throw them in, but she didn't take them home either. She left them on a bench. Epilogue. The ashes that remain. 6 months later, the house was quieter. Not empty, but different. Mark lived in the guest room. Their conversations were polite, careful. They went to therapy together, but also separately. There was no grand reconciliation, no dramatic divorce, just a slow burn towards something. Forgiveness? Maybe. In their final therapy session of the year, Jonah asked, "What are you two holding on to?" Eleanor looked at Mark and said, "Hope, I guess." Mark nodded. And guilt. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, and in the silence between them, something fragile remained. Not love as it once was, but perhaps the ashes from which something new could grow. Tess Monroe was never the type to cry when the walls came down. She'd learned early that crocodile tears made men uncomfortable, and real ones made them pity you. Neither were useful. After her arrest, she struck a deal, limited prison time, in exchange for cooperation. But it was Mark she hesitated on. Not because she loved him, she didn't. Not really. But there was a part of her that envied Eleanor. "He would have given you everything," she told Eleanor once during a tense, supervised meeting. "But you were never looking. You were too busy mourning your past to see your present." Eleanor said nothing, but her hands balled into fists. Later, Tess wrote her a letter. "I didn't destroy your marriage, I just exposed it." Chapter 9. Eleanor's Quiet Revenge. There was a part of Eleanor that wanted to make Mark pay, not through courtrooms, but in the small ways that bruised deeper, emotional incisions only she could make. She thought about sending the letter Tess wrote to the press, or forwarding the burner phone contents to Mark's clients. But each time she hovered over the send button, she froze. Not because she forgave him, but because she didn't want to become that version of herself, the one shaped by vengeance instead of healing. Instead, Eleanor chose a quieter weapon: distance. She took a solo trip to Ireland, where her grandmother had grown up. She wrote, she walked, she drank bitter tea by the sea. She read the same book 3 times. She didn't text Mark back. Chapter 10. The Hidden Journal. When she returned, Mark was still in the guest room, still making breakfast for 2 even when she didn't come down. One night, she found a journal in his study, not hidden, just there, left open, almost intentionally. She read, "I never thought betrayal could come from cowardice, but I betrayed her because I was afraid of our silence, of the grief we never spoke about. Tess was a mirror. She made me feel needed, but I never wanted her. I wanted to feel real again. And now, I wonder if Eleanor will ever look at me without that fracture in her eyes." Chapter 11. The dinner Claire invited them both to dinner. It was awkward at first, tense forks, quiet chewing. Then Claire, blunt as ever, said, "You both are either going to rebuild or burn it all down. Pick one. Don't rot in the middle." Eleanor stared at Mark across the table. He looked smaller now, not weak, just human. She asked, "If we weren't married, would you still fight for me?" Mark took a long sip of water before answering. "Yes," he said, "because I still see you, even through all this. I still see you." Chapter 12. The visit Tess was transferred to a low-security facility upstate. Eleanor went once, not to confront her, but to understand her. What did you want from him? Eleanor asked. Tess shrugged. I wanted to win, that's all. Against you, against loneliness, against the world. But it turns out, even when you win the man, you lose the war. Eleanor left with no clarity, just a cold knot in her chest and the sense that pain was rarely poetic. It just was. Chapter 13. The Bittersweet Now. A year later, the house felt less like a battleground. Mark had moved back into the master bedroom, not through ceremony but through small choices. Shared coffee, evening walks, joint therapy. They never used the word forgiveness. It felt too religious, too complete. Instead, they talked about rebuilding, brick by brick, with space for what had broken. Some nights, Eleanor would wake and look at Mark sleeping beside her and feel both comfort and caution. She wondered if that was what survival looked like, not fairy tale endings, just the choice to stay, even when it was hard, especially then. Final scene. On the porch. A spring storm passed through the town, leaving the streets wet and the sky open. Eleanor sat on the porch, watching the wind ripple through the trees. Mark joined her. They didn't speak for a while. Then, he said, "Do you still hate me?" She looked at him, rain-streaked and real. "No," she said, "but I don't love you the same way either." He nodded. "Maybe we don't need the old version of us." "Maybe not," she said. They held hands, not tightly but not loosely either. Somewhere in between. The wind carried the smell of lilac and earth. The past was still with them. But so was the future. And for now, that was enough. They never truly discussed Tess after that first year. She was the ghost they carried in different ways. Mark through guilt, Eleanor through comparison. In therapy, Dr. Kwan asked, "Do you feel like you've moved past it?" Mark hesitated. "I think we learned to live beside it." Eleanor added quietly, "Like a scar that itches when it rains. But ghosts don't like being forgotten." Chapter 15. A letter in the mailbox 2 years and 6 days after Tess's sentencing, Eleanor found a letter postmarked from Santa Fe. No return address, just her name in careful print. Inside, a single sentence. "You were never the one I wanted to hurt." No signature, no explanation. But Eleanor knew the handwriting. Tess was out. She didn't tell Mark. Not right away. Chapter 16. Claire's shadow Claire had remarried a painter named Louis. Quiet, bearded, wore linen like armor. He never asked about her past, which Claire liked. She still saw Eleanor for brunch. When Eleanor told her about the letter, Claire didn't flinch. "She's still playing the game," Claire said. "She just changed the board." Eleanor nodded slowly. "So what do I do?" Claire poured more wine. "Depends. Do you want to win or do you want peace?" Eleanor didn't answer, because she wasn't sure she could have both. Chapter 17. Mark's Confession. Mark found the letter 3 weeks later. It was buried in a drawer, between Eleanor's scarves and a folded photo of them in the Pyrenees. He stood in the kitchen, letter, trembling in his hands. "You knew," he said. Eleanor didn't deny it. "Yes." Mark leaned on the counter like it was the only thing holding him up. "Why didn't you tell me?" She met his eyes. "Because I knew you'd want to talk about it. And I'm done talking about her." He stared at her for a long time. "Do you still think about it? About us?" "Every day," she said. "But not in the way you think." Chapter 18. Tess resurfaces. Tess hadn't changed much, except now she sold handmade jewelry in a gallery on the outskirts of Santa Fe. Eleanor walked in unannounced, her presence like a thunderclap. Tess looked up, blinking. She didn't. Smile. You followed the letter? Tess said, more curious than surprised. I came for closure, Eleanor lied. They sat in a back room, 2 feet apart but miles away. You don't want revenge, Tess said. No, Eleanor replied. I want to know why, the real reason. Tess stared out the window. Because I envied you, she said at last. Not your life, not Mark, but the way he looked at you. I wanted someone to look at me like that, so I broke it. She looked down. Turns out that kind of love dies when you drop it. Chapter 19. The last message, back home. Eleanor didn't tell Mark she had gone, but she left a message on Tess's voicemail the next day. I don't forgive you, but I'm letting it go. You're not my villain anymore, just a chapter I've read too many times. Then she deleted the number. Chapter 20. The Choice On. Their anniversary, Mark gave Eleanor a small wooden box. Inside was a photograph of their wedding, creased at the edges, but intact. I thought about getting you something new, he said. But this felt honest. Eleanor ran her fingers over the frame. We can't be who we were, she said. I don't want us to be, Mark replied. I want us to be something we choose now. She looked at him, older, softer, still marked by the past, and for the first time in years, she smiled without bitterness. Epilogue. Open windows. They moved to a smaller house, no history in the walls, no blood in the foundation. Just open windows, filtered light, and space to breathe. Sometimes Eleanor would think about Tess, about the storm they had survived, and sometimes she would wake in the night and realize she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of betrayal, not of love, not even of starting over. Some endings come slow, and some don't end at all. They just fade into something new. The sea had become their constant. It framed the view from the kitchen, whispered through the windows at night, and marked the rhythm of their new life in Cape Rosalyn, a sleepy coastal town, 2 hours north of the city where no one knew what had broken them or what they had rebuilt. Mark taught part-time at the local college. Philosophy. The irony wasn't lost on him. Eleanor had opened a bookstore by the harbor called The Quiet Turn. Locals came for the poetry, tourists stayed for the stories. They still didn't speak of Tess or Santa Fe or the years they nearly dissolved, but they didn't need to. Grief no longer hung between them like fog. It had settled into something else, something quieter, like the tide. It came and went, but never stayed. Chapter 22. Claire's return. Claire showed up in a white Tesla, looking like she hadn't aged a day. She'd divorced Louis after 3 years. He was too good at silence, she said over tea. I need someone who can bruise with their words a little. She stayed with Mark and Eleanor for 2 nights, watched them dance around one another with practiced ease. You two still living in purgatory, or is this actual peace? Claire asked, one eyebrow raised. Eleanor smiled. We made a choice. Claire sipped her wine. That's the trick, isn't it? Everyone wants the feeling. No one wants to make the choice. Chapter 23. The visitor late one evening, after Claire had left, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Tess. I won't write again. I wanted you to know I met someone. He doesn't know my past. I didn't lie. I just didn't bring it forward. We live in Taos. There are dogs. Some mornings I wake up and forget I ever hurt anyone, and then I remember. I hope forgetting becomes easier for you too. I hope you've built something better. There was a pressed flower tucked inside. A blue columbine. The state flower of Colorado. Tess always had a flair for symbolism. Mark read the letter in silence, then handed it to Eleanor. She held it for a long time. Then, without a word, dropped it into the fire. Chapter 24. The fire pit. They sat by the fire pit that night, the scent of charred paper lingering in the air. Mark reached for Eleanor's hand. "Do you think we did the right thing?" he asked. Eleanor didn't answer right away. "I think we did the real thing," she finally said. "And that's harder," he nodded. "But it's ours." She leaned, her head on his shoulder. They didn't need the perfect love story. They just needed one they wrote themselves. Final chapter. What Remains Mark gave a guest lecture in the fall titled The Ethics of Forgiveness in a Postmodern World. He used their story, not with names, but with emotional truth. When asked what forgiveness meant to him, he said, "Forgiveness isn't a clean slate. It's deciding not to redraw the same scars every day." Meanwhile, at the Quiet Turn, Eleanor shelved a new poetry collection called Burn Marks. She wrote the foreword under a pen name. In it, she wrote, "There's no such thing as a fire that leaves nothing behind. Some things become ash, some things become smoke, and some things somehow become seeds." End. Tess walked barefoot through the adobe house she shared with Jonah, a kind man who sculpted in silence and drank his coffee black. He didn't ask questions about her past, not directly, but Tess knew he wondered every time she stared too long at the fire. Every time she flinched at certain kinds of laughter, every time she recoiled at the smell of bergamot, Eleanor's favorite candle. She had never said the name aloud. But Eleanor lived in the spaces between her silences. Chapter 26. Jonah's. Discovery. Jonah found the letter one evening, buried in the drawer of her old sketch desk. Eleanor's name, the pressed columbine, the apology written in half-truths. He didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he waited until sunrise when, "She always painted. Who is she?" he asked, voice quiet. Tess paused, brush hovering mid-air. "She was the wife of the man I took." Jonah nodded slowly. "Did you love him?" "No," Tess whispered. "I envied her. That was worse." He didn't say anything more, but the silence between them was no longer kind. Chapter 27. The Whisper in the Gallery. A woman came into the gallery one afternoon. Mid-40s, slender, soft-spoken, said she was visiting from the coast. She paused before one of Tess's newer pieces, a fractured landscape of a house burning under a moonless sky. "This one feels personal," she murmured. Tess glanced up. "It is." The woman turned, and for a second, just a flicker, Tess thought it was her, Eleanor. But no, the eyes were too soft. The grief too distant. Still, it reminded her that ghosts don't always knock. Chapter 28. Eleanor's letter back in Cape Rosalyn. Eleanor sat at her desk after the store closed. She wrote a letter she didn't intend to send. "Tess, I thought about you today. I don't know what I feel anymore. Maybe that's a sign of healing. Maybe it's just numbness. I hope you're becoming someone you can live with. I don't think forgiveness means we ever forget the shape of what was done. But maybe it means we stop trying to reshape ourselves around it. We're doing okay. Mark made cinnamon bread. It burned. We laughed. That felt real. That's all. That's everything." Eleanor, she sealed it in an envelope, then placed it in the fire. Like the first one. Some things were meant to burn, not deliver. Chapter 29. Mark's dream Mark dreamed of Tess that night. She was standing on a beach, her back to him, waves devouring the sand around her feet. When she turned, her face was younger, less haunted. She smiled, not at him, but at something just behind him. He woke with tears on his cheeks, and Eleanor's breath steady beside him. He didn't tell her about the dream. Some wounds were better left to sleep. Final chapter. The echo and the silence years passed. Tess stayed in Taos, though the gallery eventually closed. Jonah left quietly. No arguments, no apologies, just a note. Even silence needs truth. She never remarried, never reached out again. Eleanor and Mark grew old in Cape Rosalyn. Their story never became perfect, but it became honest. And that, in the end, was enough. At the quiet turn, a woman once asked Eleanor what her favorite book was. Without missing a beat, she said, "Something unfinished," and she smiled. End. He moved east, away from the desert and toward water, something Tess always feared. "It erases edges," she used to say. But Jonah liked that. Edges had become exhausting. He settled in a small artist's residency outside Bar Harbor, Maine. He sculpted less and walked more, watched strangers come and go. Some asked about the tension in his shoulders. A few noticed the gentleness in his voice, but none knew what he left behind. He kept one thing, a charcoal sketch Tess made of him, back when she still smiled while drawing. He never framed it, just folded it into the back of his journal where only he could find it. Chapter 2. The woman with the scar, her name, was Elise. She ran the residency kitchen, 42, with a scar that curved along her jaw like a misplaced smile. A former stage actress who left New York after her sister's death. She never said how. Jonah never asked. They danced around each other with the caution of people who've been loved recklessly before. One night, while cleaning up after a community. "Dinner," she said. "You don't talk much about before. You waiting for the right question or just hoping no one asks?" Jonah hesitated. "Maybe both." She nodded. "Fair." Chapter 3. The truth. We choose. Elise came across Jonah's sketch one night. It slipped out of his journal when he fell asleep on the couch. She didn't ask who she was, just looked at the woman's eyes, wide, haunted, unfinished, and said, "She still lives in your chest, doesn't she?" Jonah blinked awake. "Less than before, but yeah. Sometimes I hear her name in the wind." Elise didn't flinch. "She must have been something." He smiled softly. "She was, in both the best and worst ways." Then he added, "But she wasn't the only thing I needed." Chapter 4. Letters. Unsent Jonah began writing Tess letters, not to send, not to keep, but to say what silence had swallowed. "Tess, you didn't ruin me, but you did show me the edges of what I thought I could carry. I hope you kept painting. I hope the fire inside you stopped burning through others and just warmed you instead. I don't love you anymore, but I did. Enough to mourn it. Enough to forgive it." He burned every letter the moment he finished. That became the ritual. Chapter 5. The exhibition. Elise curated an exhibition that winter, The Things We Don't Say. Jonah contributed a sculpture, a woman made entirely of driftwood and wire, her hands open, palms skyward, as if offering up a storm. No title. No artist bio. Tess would have hated that. She believed art needed names. Jonah believed it needed silence. Elise, after studying it, only said, "She's finally letting go." Final chapter, quiet. Turns back in Cape Rosalyn, Mark passed away, peacefully in his sleep. Eleanor found him with a book open on his chest, and the sound of the ocean whispering through the cracked window. After the funeral, she received a package. No return address. Inside, a photograph of a sculpture of a driftwood woman, and a note. "He found peace. So did I. Thank you for holding the weight so long. I hope you put it down now." J. Eleanor smiled, then placed the note between the pages. of burn marks, the poetry collection Tess inspired, and returned it to the shelf at the quiet turn. The past had spoken, but she didn't need to reply. Some stories don't end with thunder. They end with the sound of waves against stone. End. In the city, winter meant being alone in crowds, watching couples huddle close while she crossed streets with no one waiting at the other end. After her sister Camille died, suddenly, violently, in a hit-and-run she never saw coming, winter became a season of ghosts. Grief doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it slips in quietly, a draft under the door. Elise learned that the hard way. Camille was the one who believed Elise could be something more than a second-tier actress, and a woman perpetually left behind. Losing her felt like being cut loose from gravity. Chapter 2. The Woman by the Sea. After she left New York, Elise moved to a crumbling inn outside Bar Harbor, later renovated into the artist's residency. She painted the rooms herself, tore, up-carpeting with her bare hands, and whispered Camille's name in every new coat of paint. She told no one. Then Jonah arrived, quiet, inward, careful. A man with heartbreak in his hands and an old sadness in his shoulders. Elise saw it before he spoke a word. One night, over bourbon and the sound of a nor'easter, he asked, "Do you believe people can carry each other's grief?" She replied, "Only if they stop trying to fix it." Chapter 3. The Sculpture's Echo. When Jonah sculpted the woman of driftwood and wire, Elise watched in silence. She didn't ask who she was. She didn't need to. But what she didn't say, the sculpture reminded her of Camille. The crooked strength, the wire spine, the arms that had always reached out. Camille had wanted to be a social worker. She believed in people, even the ones who didn't deserve it, especially them. That was her flaw, her light, her undoing. Chapter 4. The Day. She finally spoke during a storm that snapped 2 pines and flooded the gallery's basement. Elise found herself sitting with Jonah ankle-deep in water, sharing a flask and too many memories. "My sister," she said abruptly. Camille. She was 28. She had a smile that made people lie just to see it again. A drunk driver took her in broad daylight. Never caught. Jonah didn't look away, didn't offer pity. He only asked, "Do you still talk to her?" "Only when I'm brave," Elise said. "So not often." He nodded, as if that made all the sense in the world. Chapter 5. A letter that stayed one day, long after the exhibition ended and the sculpture had been purchased by a quiet museum in Vermont. Jonah left Elise a letter. "Elise, we've both lived with ghosts. Yours wears her face. Mine wears silence. I don't know where I go from here, but I know I want it to be somewhere I can hear your laugh. If you ever want to leave this place or stay and rebuild it with someone who won't try to fix what should be honored instead, I'd like to try. Yours, Jonah." She didn't write back. She walked to his cabin in the rain, barefoot, tears mixed with thunder, and she kissed him in the doorway. That was her answer. Final chapter. Spring, finally. The inn stayed open. They rebuilt the residency together. New artists came. Some stayed, some ran. But the fireplace was always warm. The silence was never cold. Jonah taught sculpture classes. Elise taught narrative memoir. On some nights they danced on the porch, barefoot like fools. They never married. But Elise kept Jonah's letter in her nightstand. And on her birthday each year she walked to the shoreline and said Camille's name out loud, once, just once, enough to make it real. The driftwood woman stood in a gallery miles away, gathering dust and awe. She didn't need to know her story had finally found its ending. End. Camille's final voicemail played softly in Elise's ears every year on the anniversary of her death. She'd never deleted it. "Hey, Eli, I booked the Sunday matinee for us. No excuses, no flaking. I miss your laugh. Bring the black licorice. I hate so I can yell at you about it. Love you. Text me when you wake up." She never got the text. A man in a blue truck ran a light going 62 in a 35. Camille's body was found crumpled beside her favorite mural, the one of the girl reaching for the moon with a paintbrush. Elise never stepped foot near that mural again. Chapter 1. A Life in Color. Camille worked in crisis youth intervention. She believed in second chances. Third ones, too. Her apartment overflowed with handmade cards, finger paintings, scraps of poetry her kids scribbled. She once told Elise, "Pain doesn't make people dangerous. It makes them quiet. That's when you listen harder." She lived like someone racing a storm, giving everything away before it could be taken. Chapter 2. The boy named Micah. Micah was 13. Drug mules used his backpack for runs between Queens and the Bronx. Camille saw through him immediately, saw the boy who flinched when someone reached for his shoulder, the one who smiled like he'd forgotten how. She gave him a sketch pad, then showed up every Saturday with 2 hot chocolates and new charcoal pencils. The last Saturday before she died, she said, "One day I want to hang your work in a gallery." Micah cried in the stairwell that night. Elise only found out at Camille's wake. He placed a single sketch on her coffin. It was of her, reaching for the moon. Chapter 3. The courtroom. Elise sat in the back. The man who killed Camille wore a tie crookedly and blinked a lot, like it would make him seem remorseful. But there was no trial, just a plea deal, probation, and a 10-minute statement. The system called it closure. Elise called it cowardice. She wanted to scream. But Camille never would have. She'd have whispered something kind, maybe even forgiven. That made Elise furious. Chapter 4. Rage becomes ritual. For a year, Elise painted walls in Camille's honor, first at a shelter, then a halfway house. Then her own future, the old inn in Bar Harbor. She didn't call it healing. She called it survival in brushstrokes. There were days she screamed into the ocean, nights she curled up in Camille's hoodie and wondered what loving someone that selflessly had cost her sister. She made a vow. "I will never let anyone make me feel like grief is weakness again." Chapter 5. The Visitor. 6 years later, a young man arrived at the residency. Quiet, tattooed, twitchy. His name was Micah. He said, "I knew Camille. She saved me. I heard this place was hers somehow." Elise didn't cry. She simply nodded and said, "It still is." Micah stayed for the season. He painted, didn't speak much. But on the final night, he revealed a piece, a mural on the side of the old barn. It was the girl again, reaching for the moon. This time, she made it. Final chapter, What We Leave Behind. Jonah stood beside Elise as she looked at the mural. He didn't. "Speak," Elise finally whispered. "Camille lived like she only had borrowed time. She gave more of herself away than she ever kept." Jonah touched her hand. "And now, pieces of her are everywhere." "I thought I had to let her go," Elise said. Jonah shook his head. "No, you just had to stop drowning to carry her differently." Elise closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt warm end. The residency's spring session had just begun when she arrived. A woman in her early 50s, angular and elegant in that careless way city people wear cashmere like armor. She gave no last name, only Margot, and arrived in a town car. That didn't match the gravel road it crawled up. Elise, clipboard in hand, raised a brow. "You're here for the visual arts session?" Margot smiled. sharp and sad. Sculpture. Clay. I prefer things that break under pressure. Jonah, emerging from the barn, went still when he saw her. Not recognition, but something worse. Restraint. Chapter 1. The name he never spoke. Elise didn't press him that night, though Jonah's hands trembled as he ladled soup. It wasn't cold. Next morning, Margot's application folder arrived. Elise flipped through it. No portfolio, no references, only a typed note. Sometimes the past doesn't knock. It returns uninvited, but it still wants tea. Jonah stayed quiet for 2 days. Then by the fireplace, he told Elise everything. Chapter 2. The Truth. Beneath the dust years ago, Jonah had sculpted for clients in Santa Fe. Quiet commissions. For wealthy families who wanted grief made beautiful. Tombstones, memorial busts, even urns. Margot was one of them. Her son, Alan, died from a fall during a wilderness therapy trip. He was 17. The guide said he slipped. Jonah had been hired to make the memorial statue. Alan, frozen in bronze, reaching upward. But it wasn't the art that haunted Jonah. It was what Alan had whispered during their final session. My mother thinks beauty is a replacement for truth. And after the unveiling, Jonah had left town. He didn't want to make death beautiful anymore. Chapter 3. Cracks in the Sculpture. Room Margot's presence was like perfume that lingered too long, heavy, nostalgic, faintly rotten. She was kind to the other residents, charming. She complimented Micah's mural, praised Elise's structure, left notes in the gallery suggestion box that always ended with, "Thank you for letting ghosts stay here." 2. But Jonah didn't sculpt around her. He stopped teaching. He stopped touching Elise in the quiet, habitual way he used to. Elise noticed, but didn't know what to ask. Until one night, she walked past Margot's room and heard Jonah's name, not said, pleaded. Chapter 4. The Confrontation. In the sculpture barn, among broken molds and unbaked clay, Elise found Jonah sitting on the cold floor, eyes rimmed red. She said Alan didn't slip, he whispered. He jumped. She knew. She made me build a statue to rewrite that. Elise crouched beside him. So why is she here? She said she wants to confess, that she wants me to make something else, something true. For him. For her. I think she wants forgiveness. Elise didn't reply. Her hands clenched the sleeves of her cardigan. You don't owe her that, she finally said. Jonah looked up, eyes hollow. But maybe I owe him. Chapter 5. What's made of clay, they began, the piece together. Not for Margot, for Alan. Jonah shaped the figure, a teenage boy, barefoot, hands in his pockets, standing on uneven stone, not falling, not flying, just standing. Elise helped build the base, carving the words Alan once said into the plinth. Beauty is not a replacement for truth. When Margot saw it, she didn't cry. She simply placed her hand on the boy's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for standing." Then she left without another word. Final chapter. After the storm, Jonah never heard from her again. The sculpture stayed in the gallery. Visitors didn't always understand it, but those who did stood quietly before it, like it was speaking back. Elise resumed teaching. Jonah started sculpting again, but only for himself. On a late summer night, Micah asked Elise, "Do you think ghosts ever really leave?" She smiled. "No, but sometimes they stop whispering. They just sit with you, and it becomes quieter." Jonah reached for her hand. She let him. The past stayed where it was. Unburied, but no longer bleeding. End. It started with the sound of dripping water. Micah had gone to the attic during a storm, chasing the tap-tap-tap of a leak above the old guest wing. Amid the boxes of forgotten tools and brittle books, he found a leather-bound portfolio wrapped in fabric. Inside were 5 envelopes, each marked with a year: 1996, 1998, 2000, 2001, 2002, and the same initials looping across each in familiar haunting ink. JV Chapter 1. A name unspoken, Micah brought them to Elise that night. She sat at the kitchen island, rain pooling against the window, Jonah out walking the headlands. She picked up one envelope, 1996, and frowned. "These weren't written to Jonah," she said. "They were written by him." Micah nodded. "But look at who they're to." Inside the first envelope was a letter. The paper yellowed but careful, written in ink that bled slightly around the edges. To E. "I told you I couldn't stay, but I lied. I stayed in 1,000 ways you never saw. The statue in your garden, the color you painted your porch. I stayed because leaving you never meant letting go." Elise sat back, stunned. "It's not for me," she said softly. Micah looked at her, then the letter again. "Then who's E?" Chapter 2. The Keeper of Secrets. Jonah returned hours later, soaked and silent. Elise didn't ask right away. But that night, lying beside him, she whispered, "Who is she?" His breath hitched. For the first time in months, Elise heard the crack in him again. "Her name was Elena," he said finally. "I loved her before I knew what love cost." Elise turned to face him, her voice calm but sharp. "And you wrote her letters for years?" "Yes," he said, "but I never sent them." Chapter 3. The fire in the gallery days passed. The letters sat between them like ghosts refusing to settle. Then someone broke into the gallery. They didn't steal anything, but the sculpture of Alan had been moved, shifted just slightly off-center. A single envelope had been pinned to its base. It was blank. Inside, a single photograph. Jonah and a woman in front of a house in Santa Fe. A little girl stood between them, laughing. Micah stared at it. "She looks like you," Jonah's voice broke. "That's because she is." Chapter 4. The daughter he never claimed. Her name was Marin. Jonah had met her once when she was 12. Elena had called him after her second husband died. She said Marin needed to meet her father, even if it meant nothing more than a single, quiet afternoon. "She painted my nails," Jonah said to Elise. "Bright green, called me J-Dad. I thought, maybe that was enough." Elise didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "She's here, isn't she?" Jonah nodded. "I think she's the one who broke in." Chapter 5. The girl in the woods, Micah, saw her first. Long brown hair, boots muddy, sketchbook in hand. She was standing behind the barn, staring up at the mural of Camille. When Micah approached, she didn't run. She just said, "I was told this place took strays." He offered her a granola bar and a silence that felt like permission. Later, Elise watched through the window as Jonah stepped outside. He froze when he saw Marin. She looked up. "Took you long enough." Final chapter. Threads and ashes. Jonah didn't apologize that night. He simply made her tea and sat across the table. Marin pulled out the letters. "You think you buried the past by hiding it in an attic?" she asked. "You buried me." Jonah's reply came as a whisper. "I didn't know how to be anything but sorry." Marin's jaw clenched. "I don't need sorry. I need real." Elise watched the scene unfold like a page in a painting, messy and unfinished. She felt grief and wonder twist together. Jonah was no longer just hers, but maybe he never had been. Later, Marin stayed, for a week, then 2. She helped Micah with a new mural, one of a tree with missing branches and hands reaching from below to hold it upright. When she left, she didn't take the letters. She left them in Elise's studio with a note. Everyone thinks ghosts haunt places, but they haunt people. The brave ones open the door anyway. End. It was a Sunday afternoon when the knock came. Elise was sitting by the window reading. The rain had subsided, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet earth. Jonah was in his studio, a sound of chisels against stone filling the quiet house. She didn't hear the knock at first. But then she heard Jonah stop, footsteps light as he came down the hall. The door creaked open and she glanced up, expecting him. Instead, it was Maren. Her face was the same, but harder now. Her eyes were shadowed with a weight Elise had never seen before. Jonah stood in the doorway behind her, his expression unreadable. "Maren," Elise said softly, standing. "What are you doing here?" Maren glanced at Jonah, then back at Elise. "I need your help." Chapter 1. Buried Secrets. The room was quiet as the two women sat across from one another, Maren's fingers nervously tapping against the side of her mug. Jonah remained by the door, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. "I didn't want to come here," Maren began, her voice hoarse. "But I'm running out of options." Jonah's brow furrowed, but he didn't speak. "I've been living in Santa Fe," Maren continued, "trying to make sense of everything, of him." She swallowed hard. "But I found something I shouldn't have." Elise's eyes shifted to Jonah, then back to Maren. "What did you find?" Maren hesitated before pulling a crumpled letter from her bag. She unfolded it, revealing an envelope with the same name as the ones Jonah had written to Elena. "Maren, my love, if you are reading this, then I have finally left. But not before I leave you something worth more than any treasure. There is a place where the earth holds our secrets, buried under the weight of the past. I don't want you to find it, but you will. You always do." Jonah looked away. "This was the last letter my father sent me," Maren said, her voice trembling. "But there's more." She pulled another envelope from her bag, a thick one this time. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but it was clear. It was addressed to Jonah. Chapter 2. The thing you never bury. Jonah didn't look at it. He didn't even flinch when Maren handed it to him. Elise could see the faint trembling of his fingers as he took it, but his face remained cold. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the contents. "Jonah, you can't run forever, and you know what happens when you push too hard on fragile things. You'll break them. But what happens when the one thing you can't break is the one thing you want the most? There are things that can never be undone, and the earth will always remember what you've tried to bury." Jonah closed the letter, his lips tight. Elise didn't wait for him to speak. "Jonah, what is this?" Maren's gaze flicked to Jonah, then back to Elise. "It's about my father," she said quietly. "And what he did." Jonah finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I didn't want to tell you. Any of you. Not her, not him, not anyone. But I can't outrun the truth anymore." He took a deep breath before speaking again. I was involved in something once, long before I came here. A company, a project. It was supposed to help people, make them better more than they were. But the project failed. It ended in death. And Elena, she was a part of it. Elise felt her stomach twist. What kind of project? Jonah's eyes darkened. It was medical. It was supposed to revolutionize the way we treated illness, aging, everything. But it was illegal, dangerous, and I was complicit. Maren stood up abruptly. "You don't have to say any more. I know what happened after. I know about the man who died and what my father did to keep his name clean." Chapter 3. The Sins of the Past. The room was thick with tension. every word weighing heavier than the last. I tried to get out, Jonah said, his voice low. But not everyone let me. The man who died was someone close to me, someone I thought was on our side, but I was wrong. His family, they tried to bury the truth, and I helped them. I didn't know what else to do. Marin clenched her fists. And then Elena. She had a son with him. Jonah looked up at her, regret in his eyes. I didn't know until after. But when I found out, I couldn't just let it go. I had to make it right, so I built the statue, the one of Alan. I thought it would make it right, but it never did. Elise's heart pounded in her chest. What are you saying? That everything I've seen here, everything I've believed was a lie? Jonah stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the rain-drenched world outside. It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the whole truth either. Elena and I, when I left her, I thought I was leaving the past behind. But it followed me. Marin stepped forward. And now it's come back to haunt us, to haunt me. Chapter 4. The Choice. We don't make. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling against the house. Inside, the air was heavy with unspoken words. Marin's voice broke the silence. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't know if I want it, but I need you to help me, Jonah. I need you to help me make it stop. Jonah turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and desperation. I don't know if I can fix this. I don't know if I can fix any of it. Elise watched them both, her mind spinning with everything she had just learned. The past was no longer buried in the attic. It had been dragged into the light, and now they all had to face it. What now? Elise asked softly. Jonah didn't have an answer. End. The rain didn't stop. It felt like it had been falling for weeks, each drop a weight pressing down on the house, on their lives. Jonah stood by the window long after Marin had left, staring at the blurred world outside. His hands were shaking, and every breath felt too deep. Too much. Elise stood behind him, her shadow blending into his, but she didn't reach out, didn't try to comfort him. Not yet. It was late when the silence broke. I don't think I can stay here anymore. Jonah's words were soft, but they hit Elise with the force of a confession. Chapter 1. Fragments of the past. It had been a week since Marin left. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't ask for anything more. She just vanished, as if she were a ghost that had briefly crossed their lives, leaving only a trail of ashes in her wake. Jonah spent the days after her departure in silence, retreating into his studio, working on the sculpture of Alan, trying to piece together something that felt whole. But nothing was whole anymore. Elise didn't know what to say. Her mind kept circling back to the letters, to the things Jonah had hidden for so long, to the choices they had all made, knowingly or unknowingly, that had brought them here. The guilt in Jonah's eyes was unbearable. The past stretched between them, thick and suffocating, and the weight of it was pulling them apart. She spent the days walking the edges of the property, finding solace in the small things. The wind that rustled through the tall grass, the sparrows that flitted from tree to tree. She didn't know what she was waiting for. And then one day, Micah came by, his face tight with concern. I've been talking to some people, he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. About the project, about the man who died. Jonah looked up sharply, but Micah continued, ignoring the silent command to stop. There's a deeper story there. The man who died? He was involved in more than just medical research. There's something bigger. Something criminal. Elise's heart skipped. What do you mean? Micah leaned in, his voice dropping further. I think Elena and Jonah weren't the only ones in the project. I think someone was using it to cover up a much darker plan, and I think it's still going on. Jonah stood abruptly, his eyes wide with fear. What are you talking about? Micah turned to him. I'm talking about your father's involvement in something much worse than a failed experiment. I'm talking about people who will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Chapter 2. The unraveling. Jonah didn't sleep that night. The darkness in his mind had taken on a shape. It was a shadow from the past that had been hidden in plain sight, creeping through the cracks Jonah had thought were sealed. He hadn't seen it before. He hadn't allowed himself to. But now, with Micah's words hanging between them, everything was clearer. His father's legacy was more than just betrayal. It was dangerous. It was built on lies, power, and manipulation. And now the past was coming back for him. Elise stayed awake too. She sat in the kitchen, the light from the hanging lamp casting long shadows across her face. She didn't know what to believe anymore. The woman she had been, before all of this, felt so far removed from who she was now. Everything felt fragmented. Finally, Jonah came to her, his voice quiet but firm. I need to go to Santa Fe, to confront it, to confront him. Elise didn't know if she could bear it. The thought of him facing the past, facing what he had done, what he hadn't done, was too much to imagine. But she didn't stop him. Chapter 3. Santa Fe. The drive to Santa Fe was silent. Jonah gripped the wheel tightly, the tension in his jaw clear. Elise kept her gaze out the window, watching the blur of landscape pass them by, her thoughts as scattered as the land. They arrived in the early evening, the sky tinged with the last remnants of light. Jonah led her to a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city. It was an old warehouse, rusting and forgotten, just like the past they had come to confront. Is this it? Elise asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jonah nodded. He pushed, opened the heavy door, and they stepped into the dimly lit space. The air smelled of dust and decay. It was almost like stepping into another time, another life. Then they saw it. A series of files stacked on a metal table, old and yellowing, each one marked with a familiar name, each one linked to the project. To the man who had died. Jonah reached, for one, his hands shaking. This is what I was afraid of. Elise looked over his shoulder, her eyes widening as she saw the names. And then, the familiar face staring back at her. Elena. Jonah's breath caught. Elena. She never left. Chapter 4. The Final Choice. The files told a story that neither Jonah nor Elise had expected. The man who had died, Alan, wasn't. Just an innocent victim. He had been a key player in the project, and Elena, she wasn't the woman Jonah thought she was. She had been more than a collaborator. She had been a part of something much darker. The people behind the project had erased the evidence of their wrongdoings, but not all of it. Elise's heart sank as the truth hit her like a wave. Jonah, she said, her voice shaking, you have to stop this. Whatever's happening, you need to end it. Jonah stood still, torn between the truth of his past and the man he wanted to be. I don't know if I can, he whispered. I don't know if I can fix what I've done. Epilogue. The weight of the world. They didn't stay long in Santa Fe. Jonah had uncovered what he needed, but it wasn't enough. There were too many unanswered questions. Too many things he couldn't undo. When they returned to the house, the rain had finally stopped, but the air was still heavy. Jonah and Elise stood together, their fingers brushing, but neither of them said anything. The silence between them was no longer just about the past. It was the silence of what remained unsaid, what would never be the same. And yet, despite everything, Elise felt something stir within her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility that they could still find a way forward even if they had to walk through the fire to do it. Jonah turned to her, his eyes weary. Do you think We can still find a way out of this? Elise didn't have an answer. Not yet, but she knew one thing. Some questions didn't have simple answers, and sometimes the only thing left was to face the wreckage and decide whether you could stand in the ashes and rebuild or let them consume you. And so they stood there, together but apart, watching the horizon for a future neither of them could predict. End. The apartment was small, modest, but for the first time in months, it felt like a place where Jonah and Elise could breathe. The city buzzed outside their window, distant, yet all-encompassing, but inside, it was quiet. No phone calls, no knocks at the door. Just the sound of their own footsteps. Jonah sat at the small kitchen table, the papers he'd been poring over for days now spread out before him. Every lid, every document, was another piece of the puzzle. Another step closer to exposing the corruption that had threatened to swallow them whole. Elise watched him from the counter, her gaze soft but burdened. She could see the toll the last few months had taken on him. How the weight of the secrets, the lies, and the looming danger gnawed at his mind. It was like he had become a different person, someone she didn't quite recognize, though still, someone she loved. She hadn't told him yet about the new life she was trying to build. How she had started working part-time at a local cafe, helping with the books in her free time, or how she had taken up yoga, something to quiet her mind. She was healing, slowly, in her own way. But Jonah was a different story. The past still clung to him like a shadow. "Do you think we'll ever get ahead of it?" she asked, her voice tentative, unsure if she should even speak the question aloud. Jonah didn't look up from his papers, his face drawn and tired. "I don't know, but I have to try." He was so absorbed in his search for answers, he didn't see how much he was pulling away from her, how much they were both changing. Sometimes Elise wondered if they could ever go back to the version of their life before all this started, the easy days when trust was second nature, when their love seemed invincible. She wasn't sure if that person still existed. Either of them. Chapter 2. The return of the past-it was a week after Jonah had uncovered the connection between his father's project and the international criminal network that things took an unexpected turn. One evening, a knock at the door broke the stillness. Elise answered, half expecting it to be a delivery or a neighbor with a misplaced package. But it wasn't. It was Micah. "I need to talk to Jonah," he said, his eyes darting nervously around the small apartment, as though the walls themselves might be listening. Jonah stepped out from the back room, wiping his hands on his jeans. His eyes hardened at the sight of Micah, but there was a flicker of relief, too, like an old soldier seeing another familiar face after years of battle. "What's going on?" Jonah asked, his voice low but laced with tension. Micah hesitated, glancing at Elise before speaking. "They're getting closer. The group, they know you're digging. They've already sent people to look into your background. They're trying to find out what you know and what you're planning." Jonah's stomach twisted, the weight of the threat once again settling in his chest. "I haven't stopped. I'm not backing down." Micah's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's not just about you anymore. It's about everyone you care about, including Elise." The words hit Jonah like a punch to the gut. He'd been so focused on the fight ahead, he hadn't fully grasped the danger to those around him. The thought of Elise being dragged into this, being hurt because of him, was unbearable. "Get out," Jonah said, his voice sharp, more to himself than to Micah. "I can't do this anymore." Micah didn't argue. He turned and left as quietly as he had come, the door clicking shut behind him. Elise stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "What now?" Jonah walked over to the window, looking out at the city. Below, the darkness now consuming the skyline. His reflection stared back at him, hollow, exhausted, uncertain. I don't know, he whispered. But I won't let them hurt you. Not after everything we've been through. I swear it. Chapter 3. The Edge of Trust In. The days that followed, the weight of Jonah's promise gnawed at Elise. They'd built something beautiful in their quiet moments together, moments she wanted to hold on to, even though the specter of the past continued to haunt them both. She felt the pull of the question that lingered between them, the one they both feared to ask. What if they couldn't escape? What if the things Jonah had uncovered were just the beginning, and the network they were up against was too vast, too powerful for them to survive? Jonah hadn't said it aloud, but she could feel it, the exhaustion creeping into his bones. The constant looking over his shoulder. The calls that came in the dead of night. Some of which he didn't answer, some of which he did, never explaining what they were about. But Elise had changed too. She had grown more patient, more attuned to the subtle signs of stress that rippled beneath Jonah's calm exterior. And when he closed himself off, when he retreated into his work or his thoughts, she could feel the distance growing. She didn't know how long they could keep this up. She didn't know how long they could both walk on the edge without falling. Chapter 4. The breakthrough weeks passed. Jonah's obsession with the files grew, but one afternoon, Elise came across something on her own. She had been at the cafe working through the books when a letter addressed to Jonah arrived, its contents bearing the official stamp of an organization Jonah had once worked with. It was the final link to unraveling the conspiracy. Her fingers trembled as she read the letter over. It was clear that whoever was behind Jonah's father's project had connections everywhere. Powerful connections. Jonah had known some of them, worked with them in the past, but now they were connected to his father's death and to the project he had spent years trying to make a reality. This was the key, the final piece. Elise couldn't keep this information to herself. She needed to show Jonah. She needed to force them both to face the truth. Chapter 5. Confrontation. That evening, Jonah returned from another long day of researching and dealing with the fallout. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot. He looked more like the ghost of the man he once was than the person Elise had fallen in love with. "Elise, what's going on?" he asked, noticing the letter on the counter. "What is this?" She stood up. From the chair, her voice steady but uncertain. "I think this is it. The answer to everything." Jonah stared at the letter, the color draining from his face as he realized what it meant. It's the key to everything. I've been looking for this for so long, but I didn't know where to start." Elise nodded. "We can use this to expose them. We can go to the authorities. We can stop this once and for all." But Jonah's face fell. He stepped back, his hand shaking as he crumpled the letter in his hand. "No," he said firmly. "We can't. Not yet." Elise stared at him, confused. "Why not?" "Because it's not over," he whispered. "They know we're on to them. They won't stop. Not until they've destroyed everything." Epilogue. The endless road. They had a choice now, to keep running, to keep hiding in the shadows, or to take the risk and fight back. Jonah and Elise sat in silence, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring. They didn't know if they could truly escape their past. But as Jonah looked at Elise, still his, despite everything, he realized one thing: no matter the outcome, they had to face it together. The end. The weeks following their decision to hold on to the letter, an ominous artifact of both hope and dread, had been filled with an eerie calm. Jonah and Elise had retreated into a fragile bubble of their own making, the world outside still dark with threats they could only half see. It was like holding your breath before diving into an unknown abyss, hoping that the water would not consume you. Elise could feel Jonah's presence beside her in ways she hadn't in a long time. He wasn't just a figure moving through the motions anymore. He was the man she loved, in the raw, real sense. His eyes had softened. The harshness of his obsession momentarily subsided, but it was fleeting. She saw the cracks, the way he would look away when their conversations touched on anything too deep. He was afraid of them, of the past, of the uncertainty. But they hadn't made a decision yet. They hadn't chosen whether to expose everything and face the consequences or to keep running in the hopes that the storm would pass. "Do you ever wonder?" Elise started one evening, as they sat together on the worn couch, the glow of the TV flickering on their faces. "If we're just trying to outrun the inevitable?" Jonah didn't answer right away. He had learned to be still, to think carefully about his words, but this time his silence felt heavier than usual. "We're not running, Elise," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "I'm just trying to buy us time. Time to get everything in order." Elise wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that running wasn't a solution, that they could face it together. But every time she got close to that truth, it felt like a weight she couldn't carry alone. The truth about Jonah's father, the corruption, the danger that was closing in on them both. And there were more lies, more hidden pieces of the puzzle that Jonah was yet to confront. Things he still hadn't told her about what he'd uncovered. Micah's warning haunted her. "They'll destroy everything you love." Elise didn't know if he was speaking metaphorically or literally, but she feared the latter. Her fingers traced the edge of the letter she had kept hidden in her bag, now slightly crumpled, the ink smudged from her handling. It felt like a decision waiting to happen. Chapter 2. The Darker Path. It was only a few days later that they got the call. Jonah's phone rang late at night, a time when nothing good came, a reminder that no matter how much they tried to hide, there were always others who had their eyes on you. "Jonah." The voice on the other end was familiar, but strained, almost frantic. "You need to meet me. It's bad. They know." Jonah's grip tightened on the phone, his eyes flickering with something, like panic before he masked it with the usual stoicism. He'd been preparing for this, hadn't he? The inevitable moment when the truth would leak, when everything would unravel. Where? "The old warehouse. Sycamore Street," the voice said, then hung up. Jonah didn't waste any time. He grabbed his jacket and slipped on his shoes, his movements quick and deliberate. "Elise, stay here," he said, his tone laced with urgency. But Elise wasn't about to stay behind again, not when she knew this was it. This was the moment that would either break them or build them back up. She grabbed her coat, ignoring Jonah's protest. "I'm coming with you." They didn't speak much during the drive to Sycamore Street. The city blurred by them as they neared the dilapidated warehouse, an empty, forgotten structure that seemed like the last place anyone would choose for a rendezvous. But Jonah had been in the game long enough to know that the last place is always where you're most vulnerable. It was where secrets festered, waiting for the right moment to emerge. When they arrived, the streets were eerily quiet. Not a soul in sight. Jonah pulled the car to the curb, his eyes scanning the perimeter, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. Something didn't feel right. "Stay close," Jonah whispered, his voice tense as he motioned for Elise to follow him. They stepped out into the cold night, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the dirt beneath their feet. The warehouse loomed before them like a hulking monster, dark and silent. Jonah reached for the door handle, but then something shifted in the shadows. A movement, too quick to be ignored. Before they could react, a voice echoed from within the darkness. "I knew you'd come." Chapter 3. The Unraveling. It was Micah. His face partially obscured by the shadows, but his presence unmistakable. He was there, standing in the doorway, a grim expression plastered across his face. He wasn't alone. Jonah's heart skipped a beat as he saw the figures behind Micah, two men dressed in black, their faces unreadable. "Micah, what is this?" Jonah demanded, his body tensing. Elise stood behind him, her hand gripping his arm, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what they were walking into, but she could feel the danger now. "They know everything," Micah said, his voice low and urgent. "I tried to warn you, Jonah. I tried to stop you from digging any deeper, but it's too late. They're coming for all of us." Jonah's thoughts raced. He had been close to exposing everything, hadn't he? Was it too late to turn back? Could they really fight this? Or were they now just pawns in a game that had been set in motion long? Before they'd ever realized? "Who's they, Micah?" Jonah asked, his voice a little harsher now, demanding answers. "Who are you working with?" The men behind Micah stepped forward, and in that moment, Jonah knew. These weren't people Micah could control. They weren't just rogue agents or freelancers. They were part of something bigger, something far darker. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," one of the men said, his voice gravelly and cold. "You've gotten too close to the truth. It's time to let it go, Jonah." Elise's heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow as she watched the scene unfold in front of her. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. Jonah's mind raced. The choice was no longer theoretical. He wasn't just uncovering secrets now. He was in the middle of a deadly game, and Elise was in danger. "I won't let you hurt her," Jonah growled, his voice low and determined. The adrenaline coursed through his veins. For the first time in what felt like forever, he saw clearly. He couldn't let this go on any longer. Whatever it took, whatever it meant for them, they had to end it now. Chapter 4. A bitter farewell. As the confrontation escalated, Jonah realized that the only way to protect Elise and himself was to make a final, irreversible move. The battle ahead would be brutal, but there was no other way forward. "I've made my choice," he said to the man who stepped closer, his fist tightening around the gun in his hand. "You'll never win this." In a flash, everything exploded into chaos. The sound of gunshots, the flare of light from a single flash, the thudding of footsteps retreating into the shadows. Elise held her breath, her world spinning as Jonah pulled her toward the car, urgency in his every movement. "Go," he muttered through clenched teeth. "We're done here." As they sped away, Elise looked at Jonah, his face a mix of determination and exhaustion. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least for this moment they had each other. Whether it would be enough in the end, neither of them knew, and so their story continued. Two people bound together by love and circumstance, walking a path neither had chosen but both would now have to finish. The end. The weeks that followed the chaos at the warehouse felt like a dream, one where every step forward brought them closer to the edge of a cliff. Jonah and Elise had managed to escape the immediate threat, but the damage had already been done. The storm that had been brewing for months was now a full-blown hurricane. Their lives, once simple and full of promise, had become a series of evasions, lies, and fleeting moments of normalcy that were increasingly hard to hold on to. Jonah had always been able to control his world, to shape it to his will. But now, everything felt out of reach. His thoughts had become scattered, paranoia setting in as every corner of their lives seemed to harbor a potential danger. He couldn't escape it, not even at home. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar number on his phone, every shadow in the corner of his eye made him tense. He was fighting a war on multiple fronts, against the people who were closing in on him, against the truth he had tried to bury, and against the relationship he had once believed was unbreakable. Elise could feel the weight of his internal struggle. She knew that Jonah was no longer the man she had married, at least not entirely. The darkness that had surrounded him had seeped into his soul, and it had changed him. But she couldn't bring herself to leave. Despite everything, despite the lies, the betrayal, the danger, she still loved him. There were moments, brief, flashes of the man he once was that made her hold on tighter. She wasn't ready to let go, not yet. But the truth hung between them like a shadow, always there, just out of reach. "I can't keep doing this, Jonah," Elise said one evening, her voice quiet but firm. They were sitting in the living room, the TV flickering with muted light, both of them staring at it but not really seeing it. Jonah looked up from the glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze dark. "Doing what?" "This," she gestured vaguely between them. "This, running, hiding, waiting for something to explode. I can't live like this anymore." Jonah's jaw clenched. He had known this moment was coming. Elise wasn't built to live in fear, to hide in the shadows. She needed stability, truth, a life that wasn't governed by secrets and lies. "I'm doing everything I can to fix it, Elise," he said, his voice low. "I just need more time." "But we're running out of time," she said, her eyes searching his. "How long are we going to keep pretending that everything is fine? I can't breathe, Jonah. I can't breathe under all this." Jonah sat, the glass down, the clink of it against the table sharp in the silence. His mind raced, torn between wanting to protect Elise and knowing that the longer they stayed in this limbo, the more dangerous it became. There was no safe place for them anymore. "I'll fix it," he repeated, but there was no conviction in his voice. Elise shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You can't fix this. You can't fix everything by yourself, and I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to face it with me, Jonah, but if you can't do that, then I don't know what we're even doing here." Her words hit him like a slap. He had been so focused on the external threats, on the people who wanted him dead, on the secrets that could ruin him, that he hadn't realized how much he had neglected her, how much he had neglected them. "I don't want to lose you, Elise," he said, his voice raw now, the cracks finally starting to show. "But I don't know how to fix this either. I don't know how to fix me." Elise met his gaze, her eyes softening. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. The warmth of her touch felt like a lifeline. "I don't need you to fix everything," she said gently. "I just need you to be here, with me. I can't do this alone anymore." There was a moment of silence, heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. Jonah wanted to say more, wanted to promise her that things would get better. But the truth was, he wasn't sure. The path ahead was too murky, the consequences too far-reaching, and yet in that moment he made a choice. He wasn't going to lose her. Not without a fight. "I'm here," Jonah said, his voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes." Chapter 6. The Price of the Truth. The decision to confront the truth, to finally face the forces that had been pulling their strings, was one that Jonah had been avoiding for months. But Elise's words had cut through his armor, forcing him to see that no matter how deep he buried himself in lies, the truth was already waiting for him, and it would find him sooner or later. Jonah spent the next few days digging into every connection he could find, following leads that were quickly growing colder but were still vital. There were whispers, murmurs from old contacts that had been paid to stay silent, but nothing substantial. The deeper he dug, the more elusive the answers became. Whoever was behind this, whoever had orchestrated everything, was playing a game. With him, one that he couldn't fully understand, and Elise, she was still caught in the crossfire. One evening, Jonah received an unexpected message. A single line of text, no signature, no explanation. "Meet me at the pier. Midnight." Jonah didn't hesitate. He knew this wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge. Whoever had been pulling the strings was finally ready to reveal themselves. "Stay here," he said to Elise as he prepared to leave. His voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. He didn't want her involved in whatever was about to unfold. Elise's eyes flashed with concern. "Jonah, I have to do this alone," he interrupted, his tone more forceful than he meant it to be. "You're safer here, please." She stared at him for a moment, then nodded, though her expression was filled with doubt. "Just be careful." Jonah didn't answer, already stepping out the door, the cold night air hitting him as he headed to the pier. Every step felt like he was walking further into the unknown, into a future where he wasn't sure he would come back from. But he had no choice. This was the only way to end it. Chapter 7. The Revelation. The pier was deserted, the sound of the waves crashing against the posts, the only noise in the stillness of the night. Jonah's footsteps echoed as he approached the end, the salty air biting at his skin. He wasn't sure what he expected, but what he saw when he reached the end was worse than anything he could have imagined. Standing there, waiting for him, was Micah. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a figure Jonah hadn't seen in years, his own father. For a long moment, Jonah simply stared, disbelief settling in like a thick fog. "I told you, Jonah." Micah's voice was strained, almost apologetic. "You should have stayed out of this." Jonah's heart pounded in his chest, 1,000 questions racing through his mind. But the one that burned brightest was the one that didn't have an answer. "Why, Dad? Why didn't you warn me?" And with that question, Jonah realized that the very foundation of his life had been built on lies. The truth of everything, his family, his past, the danger surrounding them all, was now out in the open, and the only thing left to do now was to decide what kind of man he would be when the dust finally settled. To be continued. Jonah's heart raced, but his body felt like stone. His father stood there, a figure from his past that Jonah had long since buried, a man who had shaped so much of his life, his values, his beliefs, even his own sense of what was right, now stood as the catalyst for everything that had gone wrong. Jonah's world, once built on principles and trust, had crumbled like a fragile house of cards. "Why, Dad?" Jonah finally spoke, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "Why did you let this happen?" His father, Alan, didn't immediately respond. His eyes flickered to Micah before he stepped closer, his face hardening as he met Jonah's gaze. The years of distance between them seemed to dissolve in that moment, replaced by something darker. Guilt, regret, or perhaps something worse. Indifference. "You think I had a choice?" Alan's voice was cold, rough with years of unspoken tension. "You don't understand what's at stake, Jonah. You never did. The people I had to answer to, what I had to do. It was never just about us. You should have known that." Jonah took a step forward, the anger swelling in his chest. "I should have known?" His voice cracked with frustration. "You don't get to say that. He swallowed hard, taking a breath. "You left me in the dark, and now you're telling me that all this pain was inevitable?" Micah, silent until now, shifted uneasily beside Alan. Jonah could feel the tension between them, the unease that had grown since this confrontation had begun. Finally, Micah spoke, his voice quieter, but no less intense. "It's not that simple, Jonah. Your father didn't choose this. It was forced on him, on both of us." He glanced nervously at Alan, who didn't even flinch. "You don't understand the forces you're up against. The people you've been digging into. They don't play by your rules." Jonah clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. The betrayal, the lies, the people that had used him, all of it was too much. "You think I don't know that?" he spat, his breath heavy. "But this isn't just about them. This is about us. All these years you've been standing by while I've been fighting shadows, and I had no idea. Do you have any idea what that does to someone, to live in a world of half-truths?" Alan's expression darkened. "You think this is easy for me?" he barked. "This isn't some kind of game, Jonah. And it sure as hell isn't about you and me. You think I wanted this for you? I wanted you to have a life outside of this mess." Jonah stepped back, disbelief written all over his face. "Then why didn't you stop it?" His voice cracked again, the pain bleeding through. "You could have protected me. You could have—" "I couldn't," Alan interrupted sharply, his voice barely contained. "You were too deep, and frankly, I never thought you'd find out. Not this way." The weight of those words hit Jonah like a freight train. His father, the man he had trusted his entire life, had never believed in him. Never believed he would be capable of unraveling the secrets that had destroyed their family. "Then what was the plan, huh?" Jonah asked, his voice trembling. "You were just going to let it all fall apart? Let everything I worked for get swept away by people I didn't even know existed?" Alan's face softened just for a moment. "I tried, Jonah. God knows I tried. But I was too late. They'd already pulled the strings. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late." Jonah took a step back, his mind racing. This was his father, the man who had always told him that hard work, loyalty, and integrity were enough. Yet here he was admitting that those things hadn't mattered in the world he had been forced to navigate. "You knew everything," Jonah whispered, his throat tightening. "And you just stood by." Alan didn't answer. His silence spoke volumes. Jonah could feel the bitterness swelling inside him, but there was a deeper, colder realization creeping up on him. There was no more clarity. No more clean lines between good and evil. His father wasn't a villain, not entirely. He was a man who had been swept up in forces too big to resist. But Jonah didn't know if he could forgive that. Not now. Not when so much had been lost. Jonah turned to Micah, looking at him with new eyes. He hadn't expected Micah to be a part of this, but it seemed inevitable now. Micah had been in it up to his neck. The man who had once been his brother, his confidant, had been complicit in the web of lies all along. "Was this your plan too?" Jonah asked him, his voice steely. "To use me?" Micah met his gaze without flinching, but Jonah could see the guilt etched across his face. He looked away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "It wasn't like that, Jonah. You have to understand, everything we've done, everything we've been involved in, it's all to keep you safe, to keep you from getting hurt. But I can't protect you from the truth anymore." The truth. That word seemed to hang in the air between them, a weight none of them could carry alone. Jonah felt his anger turn into something colder, an icy resolve. The trust he had once had for these men, these people who had shaped his world, had been shattered. He couldn't go back. He couldn't erase the last few months, the pain, the destruction. He had to make a choice. "Enough!" Jonah's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I'm done running, and I'm done listening to excuses. If you think I'm going to stand here and pretend that everything you did was to protect me, you're wrong. I'm not part of your game anymore." Alan's face tightened. "You think you can just walk away from this, Jonah? You think you can leave all this behind?" Jonah's chest tightened. "What I can do is decide my own future. And right now, that future doesn't include you." He turned away from both of them. He couldn't look at them anymore, couldn't stomach the lies they had fed him. He had always believed in the idea of family, of loyalty, but now those concepts felt hollow, meaningless, in a world where betrayal ran so deep. As Jonah walked away from the pier, the weight of everything that had happened threatened to swallow him whole. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew one thing: he couldn't look back. Chapter 9. Aftermath in. The weeks that followed, Jonah's life became a careful reconstruction of everything he had lost. The relationships he had once taken for granted, his father, Micah, were fractured beyond repair. He found himself alone, navigating a world that had changed completely. and Elise standing by his side was the only constant he had left. But even their relationship was strained. The trust they had once shared, built on years of communication and mutual respect, had been irrevocably damaged by the dark truths that had come to light. They had spent the last few years living in the illusion of control, only to find themselves at the mercy of forces far greater than either of them could have imagined. Jonah wasn't sure where his future would lead him, but for the first time in a long while, he had control over his own destiny. As for Elise, she stood beside him in the wreckage of their lives, uncertain but hopeful. She had no answers, no promises, but only the tentative belief that somehow, despite everything, they could rebuild. Maybe not what they had, but something new, something different, something real. But even that was uncertain. Because in this world of betrayal, who could say what was real anymore? The end. Jonah sat alone in his apartment, his fingers tracing the rim of a half-empty glass. The weight of his decisions, the wreckage of his life, pressed down on him with each breath. He'd made his choice. He'd severed ties with his father, walked away from the web of lies, but the emptiness still gnawed at him. Was it really the right decision? Or had he just traded one kind of pain for another? His phone buzzed on the table. Elise. Her name flashed across the screen, and he hesitated. Before picking up, "Jonah?" Her voice was soft, fragile, as if she too was still trying to figure out what they were in the aftermath of everything. "I think we need to talk." He didn't respond immediately. The last few weeks had been filled with silence between them, punctuated only by the occasional attempt at conversation that always seemed to fall apart. They were both raw, both struggling with what had happened, her betrayal of trust, his shattered family, the discovery of secrets that neither of them could have anticipated. "I know," Jonah finally said, his voice a rasp. "I've been thinking the same thing." There was a brief silence on the other end. He could hear her breathing, as if she was trying to gather her thoughts. "Are you okay?" The question felt hollow, but Jonah wasn't angry with her. He knew she meant it in the simplest, most sincere way possible. But the truth was, he didn't know if he was okay. He didn't know if he ever would be. "I'm getting there," he replied. "But I'm not sure where that there is yet." There was another pause, but it wasn't awkward. It felt like the kind of space between them that neither could fill. Not yet. Not with words. Not when the reality of their situation was still so fresh, so jagged. "Do you think we can fix this?" she asked quietly. Jonah's stomach churned. The question was loaded with everything they hadn't been able to say to each other, every word left unspoken, every silence they'd ignored. How could they fix something so broken? Was it even possible? He didn't know. "I don't know," he admitted. "I wish I did, but I don't. I thought I had the answers, Elise. I thought I knew exactly what needed to be done, who I needed to walk away from, who I needed to protect myself from. But I was wrong. I don't have any answers anymore." Elise exhaled softly, and Jonah could almost hear the weight of her own confusion and regret. "I don't want to lose you, Jonah. But I don't know how we move forward. I don't know how to go back to how things were." Jonah's hand tightened around the glass in front of him. "You can't go back. Neither of us can. Not to the way things were. But maybe that doesn't have to be the end of us." "I don't know what that looks like," she replied. "I don't know if I even have a place in your life anymore. I ruined everything. Stop," Jonah cut her off, his voice firm. "We both made mistakes. This is on both of us. I let things go too long. I was too blind to see what was right in front of me. It wasn't just you, Elise. It was me too." Another silence followed, but this one felt different. It was heavy with the weight of honesty, of unspoken truths finally coming to the surface. Jonah wasn't sure if it was the right time to say it, but he couldn't stop the words from coming. I can't promise anything, Elise. I can't promise that we'll get through this, that we'll come out the other side better than before, but I'm willing to try. If you are. Her breath hitched on the other end. I want to try, she whispered, but I don't know how. Jonah looked out the window, his eyes staring at the city lights below. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. It felt like the calm before the storm, or maybe the storm that had already passed. The world was still spinning, but everything had shifted beneath his feet. And yet, there was something in her voice, something in the way she spoke, that made him believe they could at least begin to rebuild. Not immediately, but maybe someday. Maybe we don't have to know everything right now, Jonah said quietly. Maybe we just need to take it one step at a time. I can do that, she said softly. One step at a time. Jonah closed, his eyes a mix of relief and uncertainty washing over him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more difficult conversations. But at least for now, they were still talking. They hadn't given up completely. That, in itself, felt like a small victory. Chapter 11. A New Path. The days that followed were filled with cautious optimism. Jonah and Elise navigated their way through the aftermath of the betrayal, each trying to understand the other's pain, trying to rebuild the trust they had lost. There were moments of tension, moments where the weight of the past threatened to crush them, but there were also moments of tenderness, of quiet understanding. Jonah didn't have all the answers, and neither did Elise. But they were learning how to communicate again, how to be open with each other, how to face the hard truths that had once been buried beneath the surface. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt on both sides. But there was something important happening. Something that neither of them had expected. Healing. Jonah spent more time thinking about his father, about the choices he had made and the consequences of those decisions. He couldn't change the past, but he could control his future. And he knew now that it would be different. He would never be the same person he had been before the betrayal, before the lies had come crashing down. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe it was an opportunity to become someone stronger, someone more aware of the world and the people in it. As for his relationship with Elise, Jonah wasn't sure where it would go, but he was willing to fight for it. Not because he thought it would be easy, but because he knew they both deserved a chance at something better. There was no perfect ending here, no magical resolution, but there was hope, and sometimes that was enough. As Jonah stood in the doorway looking out at the wide city beyond, he realized that, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't looking back anymore. He was looking forward. The end. The weeks passed, and Jonah found himself in unfamiliar territory, a space where the boundaries between past and future blurred, and where every decision felt like a fork in the road. The apartment, once a sanctuary of solitude, now felt like a place where the past still lingered. Every time he opened the door, he was confronted by memories of the life he thought he had, a life now marred by betrayal. But there was also a new kind of weight, a lighter one, perhaps, but still burdensome. Elise's presence, though a source of comfort at times, was also a reminder of the brokenness they were trying to repair. They were taking small steps towards something resembling normalcy, but each day felt like an uphill battle. Jonah had become accustomed to the uncertainty, the constant questioning of whether the steps they were taking were enough, whether the past could ever truly be forgiven. Elise was trying, too. She had become quieter over the past few weeks, as though she were silently waiting for the other shoe to drop. Jonah knew she was haunted by her actions, by the choices she had made, and he couldn't help but feel the same about his own. It was strange, this unspoken dance they were both engaged in. each trying to reassure the other without ever quite acknowledging the full extent of their pain. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, the TV on in the background, Jonah found himself staring at her. She was absently flipping through a magazine, her brow furrowed in thought. There was something different about her lately, something that told him she was holding back, as if waiting for him to push her into some kind of reckoning. "Elise," he said quietly, breaking the silence. She glanced up, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, Jonah saw a flicker of vulnerability in them, a recognition of the uncertainty that hovered between them. "What's on your mind?" she asked softly, setting the magazine aside. Jonah hesitated, his mind racing. He could feel the pressure of the unspoken words, the questions that had been building inside of him for days. "How do we fix this?" His voice was thick with emotion, a rawness that surprised him. "I know we've been trying, but I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's okay. Every time I look at you, I see the betrayal. I see everything that's been broken, and I don't know if I can keep pretending that we're just going to move on from it." Elise swallowed hard, her expression pained. She didn't answer immediately, instead running her fingers through her hair as if trying to gather her thoughts. Jonah watched her, his heart heavy, wondering if the words he had just spoken had pushed them to a breaking point. "I'm sorry, Jonah," she whispered, her voice thick with regret. "I wish I could take it all back. I wish I hadn't hurt you, but I can't change what happened. All I can do is try to show you that I'm not that person anymore. That I want to fix this. Fix us." Jonah nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I want to believe that, but I don't know if I can." Elise's eyes welled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away. "I don't want you to forgive me because you think you should. I want you to forgive me because you believe we can have something real again. But I understand if that's not possible." The weight of her words hung in the air between them, the unspoken question of whether they could ever truly rebuild their relationship. Jonah felt the pull of the past, the anger, the hurt, and yet there was something in her voice, a sincerity that touched something deep inside him. Could he forgive her? Could he forgive himself? Before he could respond, the doorbell rang, interrupting the heavy silence. They both turned toward the door, startled. Jonah stood up slowly, his instincts on edge. Who could it be at this hour? He opened the door to find a familiar face standing in the doorway. Daniel, Elise's ex-husband. "Jonah," Daniel said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." Jonah's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen Daniel in years, not since the divorce. He had heard the rumors, of course, how Daniel had spiraled after their separation, his failed relationships, his increasingly erratic behavior. But Jonah hadn't expected him to show up at his door. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jonah's voice was low, a mixture of disbelief and anger. Elise stood behind him, her face paling as she recognized the man standing at the door. "I'm not here to start trouble," Daniel said quickly, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. I need to talk to you both. It's important. Something's going on, and it's bigger than any of us." Elise's eyes flicked to Jonah, her expression unreadable. Jonah could feel the tension building, the weight of the past pressing down on all of them. He glanced at Elise, but she didn't speak, and Jonah wasn't sure what to do. What was Daniel talking about? "Come in," Jonah said reluctantly, stepping aside. He didn't trust Daniel, but he didn't know what else to do. Daniel walked. Inside, his eyes darting nervously between Jonah and Elise. He looked older than Jonah remembered, more haggard, more desperate. But there was something in his eyes, something Jonah couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps? Or guilt? "Okay," Jonah said, his voice tense. "What's so urgent?" Daniel took a deep breath, looking at both of them. "I know you two have your own issues, but I think you need to hear this. There's someone out there who knows everything. Everything about the lies, about your marriage, about what happened with me. They know about the affair. And they're not done yet. They want something from both of you." Jonah's heart skipped. A feeling of dread washed over him as he looked at Daniel. "Who?" Daniel shook his head, glancing nervously over, his shoulder as if expecting someone to be lurking in the shadows. "I don't know, but they've been watching. I've gotten threats, and I think they're going to come for you next." Jonah stared at Daniel, feeling a chill creep up his spine. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was something bigger, something more dangerous than either of them had imagined. "What do you want us to do about it?" Jonah asked, his voice tight with suspicion. He couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was hiding something more than he was letting on. Daniel hesitated before speaking again, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I think we need to work together. I don't know who this person is, but they're coming for all of us." Jonah's mind raced, and for the first time in weeks, the uncertainty of his life felt like it was about to be compounded by something much darker. The future, already fragile and uncertain, was now on the brink of something far more dangerous. As he looked at Elise, he could see the fear in her eyes. She was scared, too. Jonah wasn't sure if it was the fear of what was coming or the fear of what they might lose, but it didn't matter. Their lives were about to change again, and this time, they might not have the luxury of deciding how. To be continued. The next few days felt like an endless descent into uncertainty. The arrival of Daniel had cast a shadow over Jonah and Elise's fragile attempt at rebuilding something resembling trust. Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that they were all trapped in a web, spun by forces none of them fully understood. The situation had escalated beyond personal betrayal. It had become something darker, more insidious. Jonah sat at the kitchen table, the weight of Daniel's words hanging over him like a storm cloud. Elise was in the living room, pacing restlessly. Every time Jonah glanced at her, he saw the fear etched into her face. It wasn't the fear of losing their marriage anymore, though that was still present. No, this was something else. Something far more urgent and dangerous, and neither of them knew how deep this rabbit hole really went. Daniel had left after their conversation, promising to keep in touch and saying he'd find out more. But Jonah knew he couldn't rely on him. Daniel had always been a loose cannon, a man driven by self-preservation rather than principle. The idea that he was the one bringing them this warning only made Jonah feel more uneasy. "Jonah!" Elise's voice broke through his thoughts, and he looked up to find her standing at the entrance of the kitchen. Her face was pale, her expression drawn. "What do you think he meant? What did he mean by, 'they're coming for us'?" Jonah ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts a chaotic mess. "I don't know, Elise, but I can't ignore it. This is bigger than anything we've dealt with." He stood up slowly, pacing in the small space of their kitchen. "Someone knows about everything. The affair, the lies, everything. And now they're threatening us. That's not just about you and me anymore. It's not just about our marriage. This is something else." Elise's gaze dropped to the floor, her hands wringing nervously. "But who could it be? Who knows all of this? Who would want to come after us like this?" Jonah stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto hers. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. We need to get ahead of this before it gets worse. Whoever this is, they've been watching us for a long time. And I don't think they're done." Elise's lips trembled. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, the words unspoken. Jonah could feel the tension building between them, the unacknowledged questions hanging in the air. They both knew that their marriage, whatever it was now, wasn't the only thing on the line. "I'm going to look into this," Jonah said, his voice firm, though there was an edge of uncertainty in it. "I'll find out who's behind it." "And what if it's someone we know?" Elise's voice was barely a whisper. She was looking at him now, her eyes wide with fear. Jonah's stomach twisted at the thought. He didn't want to entertain it, but the possibility loomed large. If someone they knew was orchestrating this, someone close to them, then everything was far more complicated than he had imagined. His mind raced through the list of people who could be involved, but he couldn't make sense of it. "I don't know," Jonah replied, his voice taut. "But we can't let it take us down. Not again." The following morning, Jonah began his investigation. He went through the familiar steps of digging into their past, looking through old messages, emails, anything that might provide a clue. But everything felt like a dead end. There were no obvious leads, no signs that anything had been out of place until Daniel had come to them. But Jonah couldn't ignore the feeling that someone had been in control of everything, every choice, every lie, every action, and that control had led them here, to this moment. At the same time, Elise had begun pulling away, retreating into herself more and more. Jonah noticed it in the way she moved about the apartment, her quietness, the way she avoided his gaze when he asked her about the past. The guilt still weighed heavily on her. And while Jonah had made tentative steps toward understanding, he couldn't help but feel the emotional distance growing. Every conversation felt like a minefield, every word they spoke laden with unspoken resentments and fears. He had tried to talk to her about the threats, but she seemed to close off more when he did. She didn't want to confront the possibility that their past mistakes were catching up with them in ways they couldn't control. And Jonah knew that, at least for now, they were both struggling to process what this all meant, not just for their relationship, but for their safety. Then, 2 days later, Jonah received a call that made his blood run cold. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, low and distorted, as though filtered through a voice changer. "You've been asking questions, Jonah. It's time you stopped." The words were clipped, menacing. "If you want your wife safe, you'll back off. This goes beyond your marriage. Do yourself a favor, stay out of it." Jonah's heart pounded in his chest. He felt a rush of adrenaline, followed by an overwhelming sense of helplessness. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp. There was a pause, and the distorted voice came back, cold and calculating. "You'll find out soon enough, but don't make this harder on yourself than it needs to be. Leave it alone or we'll all regret it." The line went dead before Jonah could respond. He stood there, holding the phone, staring at the screen. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of everything Daniel had said, the cryptic warning. Whoever this was, they weren't playing games. And now Jonah was tangled in a mess far darker than he had anticipated. He set the phone down slowly, his pulse still racing. Elise had to be told. She had to know the gravity of what was happening. But as he turned to her, the weight of the decision hung heavily on him. Could he protect her from this? Could he protect them both? He took a deep breath and walked toward the living room where Elise sat, her face pale as she gazed out the window, lost in thought. "Elise," Jonah said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We need to talk. There's something you need to know." To be continued. Jonah's heart pounded as he stood in the doorway of the living room, the weight of what he was about to tell Elise pressing down on him. Her back was turned to him, her gaze distant, lost in thoughts of her own. He couldn't blame her. They were both drifting, but the ship was sinking faster than either of them could repair the damage. "Elise," Jonah said again, his voice more urgent this time. She didn't turn. He crossed the room and stood just behind her. His hand hovered in the air, not knowing whether to comfort or to draw a line in the sand. "We need to talk. There's something. Someone is threatening us." She stiffened at his words, her body rigid with a tension Jonah hadn't seen before. Slowly, she turned to face him. Her eyes were red, as though she hadn't slept in days, and there was a deep hollowness in them. An emptiness that Jonah had come to fear was slowly consuming her. "What do you mean, threatening us?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of panic behind the words. Jonah swallowed hard. He couldn't protect her from this. "I received a call this morning. Someone's been watching us. They know everything. Everything, Elise. The affair, the lies, all of it. And they said if I don't stop looking into it, they'll hurt us." The silence between them stretched long, so long that Jonah could hear the blood rushing in his ears. Elise's face seemed to lose all color. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. He could feel the weight of her guilt, the crushing realization that she had let them both fall so far into this pit. "Who are they?" Elise finally asked, her voice shaky. "Who is it?" "I don't know." Jonah's response was low, laced with frustration. "But it's bigger than us. This isn't just about our marriage anymore. It's about something much darker." She closed her eyes, taking a slow, steadying breath. When she opened them again, her gaze met his with a mixture of resolve and fear. "What do we do now?" Jonah didn't have an answer. He only knew that they couldn't keep running. They had to face this. Together or apart, he wasn't sure. But the idea of separating now, after everything that had happened, felt like an impossible choice. Still, the thought lingered in the back of his mind. Was their marriage even salvageable after everything that had transpired? Or had the lies, the deceit, and now the danger carved too deep a rift for them to cross? Elise stood up from the couch, walking toward him with slow, deliberate steps. "Jonah, if we're going to face this, we need to be honest with each other. Completely honest." Her voice dropped, a tear slipping down her cheek. "There's something I haven't told you, something I've been hiding even from you." Jonah's stomach twisted. "What is it?" Elise hesitated, the words clearly difficult for her to say. "Daniel. He didn't just come here because of the affair. He came because he wanted something from me, something from us." Jonah's breath hitched. "What are you talking about? What did he want?" Elise took another breath, her face contorting with shame. "Jonah, I didn't tell you the full truth. Daniel and we had a brief affair. Before you found out about mine, I didn't want to tell you because I knew how much it would hurt. But now, with everything going on, I can't keep hiding it from you. He was never just some random person. He's been in this mess too." Jonah stood frozen, his mind racing to make sense of the revelation. His first instinct was anger, rage, at Elise, at himself, at everything that had led them here. But it was quickly replaced by something far darker. The truth was more complicated than he had imagined. Daniel had been involved with both of them. And now Jonah realized that the line between victim and perpetrator was thinner than he had ever thought. "Elise," Jonah said, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to stay calm. "You're telling me that Daniel is a part of all this? That he's been playing us both? And now he's threatening us? Is that what you're saying?" Elise nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't want any of this to happen, Jonah. I swear to you I didn't. But Daniel, he's been trying to control everything. He's using us, using our mistakes, to manipulate something bigger. And now, it's all spiraling out of control." Jonah's mind raced. A sickening realization settled in. They weren't just dealing with a personal betrayal anymore. They were in the middle of something far more dangerous. Daniel wasn't just a man Elise had been involved with. He was a part of something that had been slowly enveloping them both. "What is he trying to do?" Jonah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Elise answered, shaking her head. "But I think he wants to destroy us. Not just our marriage. He wants to make us pay for what we did to him, for the lies. I think he's involved in something bigger than we could ever have imagined." The words hung in the air, the weight of them suffocating. Jonah felt a cold chill run through his veins. Elise's betrayal had already shattered him, but this was something beyond their personal strife. They were pawns in a game they didn't understand. Chapter 15. The Point of No Return. The days that followed were marked by frantic decisions and whispered conversations. Jonah knew they had to confront Daniel, had to force him to reveal what he was really after. But every time Jonah tried to move forward, a new piece of the puzzle seemed to fall into place, revealing just how deep the conspiracy ran. One evening, Jonah sat in his car outside a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. He had tracked down Daniel, who had been making secret meetings with unknown figures. Jonah had a feeling that tonight would be the night everything came to a head. Elise's voice echoed in his mind. "Be careful, Jonah." But the warning came too late. His hand gripped the steering wheel as he prepared to enter the unknown. The future was no longer just about their marriage. It was about survival. And Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Jonah pushed open the door of the nondescript building, the chill of the night air following him inside. His footsteps echoed through the empty, dimly lit hallway. He could feel the tension coiling in his chest, a mix of anger, fear, and confusion. The deeper he went into this tangled web, the more he realized that the truth wasn't just about betrayal. It was about power, manipulation, and secrets too dark to uncover. He reached the end of the hallway and paused outside a door marked "Private." His pulse quickened. This was it. Behind that door was the man who had turned his life upside down, the man who had once been a part of the story, but now was the architect of their unraveling. Daniel. Jonah didn't knock. He pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit room. The smell of stale tobacco hung in the air. Daniel sat behind a cluttered desk, his back to Jonah, but he didn't need to turn to know who had entered. "I knew you'd come." Daniel's voice was smooth, almost too calm. "You're always so predictable, Jonah." Jonah didn't answer. He just stared at Daniel, the man who had torn apart everything Jonah thought he knew about trust and loyalty. The boxer's betrayal was still fresh, raw, and painful. But now, it was the consequences of that betrayal that haunted him. "What do you want from me?" Jonah finally asked, his voice colder than he intended. Daniel turned his chair slowly, his eyes calculating. "What do I want?" "I'm not the one who's been sleeping with my wife, Jonah. I'm not the one who's been playing games with people's lives." Jonah felt a flash of rage. "This isn't about me and Elise anymore. It's about something bigger, isn't it? You've been using her, using me. What the hell is going on?" Daniel smirked, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. "It's always about something bigger, Jonah. You've been so focused on your little domestic drama that you didn't see the bigger picture. You and Elise, both of you, are just pieces in a much larger game. And now you're in over your head." Jonah felt a shiver crawl down his spine. "What are you talking about?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "There's a network, Jonah. A network of people who don't like to be crossed. I've been involved with them for a long time. Elise got caught up in it, and now you have too. You see, it's not just about revenge. It's about power, and power," he paused, his smile widening, "is something you're not even close to understanding." Jonah's mind raced. He had known something was off. He had known that the stakes were higher than just a marital betrayal. But this was a whole new level of danger. "What does that mean for us?" "For me and Elise?" Jonah asked, his voice barely controlled. "Everything," Daniel replied, leaning back in his chair, his eyes gleaming with something Jonah couldn't quite place. Amusement, maybe, or something darker. "It means your lives are forfeit. You're too entangled now. There's no getting out." Jonah clenched his fists. "You've been manipulating us all this time, but you're not getting away with it." Daniel chuckled, the sound cold and devoid of humor. You really think you can stop me? You're not the first to think that, but you're all just pieces in the game, and when the game ends, well, someone has to lose. Jonah didn't know what to say to that. There was nothing he could say. The man in front of him wasn't just a betrayer. He was something far worse. Jonah had been fighting against a shadow, and he hadn't realized it until now, with a swift motion. Daniel stood and walked toward the window, staring out into the night. You want to know the truth, Jonah? Fine. Elise isn't the only one in danger here. You've been dragging her down with you, and now... He turned back to Jonah, his eyes cold and calculating. You're dragging yourself down with her. There's no escape from this. Jonah took a step forward, his heart pounding. You think I'm just going to walk away from this? That I'm going to let you destroy my life and get away with it? Daniel's eyes flicked to Jonah's, and for a brief moment, something like uncertainty flickered behind them. But it was gone as quickly as it came. You'll learn, Jonah. You'll learn that the truth is more dangerous than any lie you could ever tell. And when you figure that out, it'll be too late. Jonah's breath caught in his throat as the weight of Daniel's words sank in. He didn't know how, but he knew this wasn't just about him anymore. The game was bigger than him, bigger than Elise. And he wasn't sure if he could win, but he had no choice but to try. Chapter 17. The choice Elise waited at home, her anxiety palpable. The minutes stretched on, each one heavier than the last. Jonah had left hours ago and he hadn't called. She knew he was meeting Daniel, but she didn't know what to expect. Would he come back to her, angry, afraid, or perhaps even worse, broken? The door opened and Jonah stepped inside, his face drawn and tight with an emotion she couldn't read. He looked at her for a long moment before stepping further into the room. Jonah, she started, her voice tentative. What happened? Did you? I met with Daniel. Jonah cut in, his voice rough. And things are worse than I thought, Elise. He's not just playing games, he's part of something dangerous. We've been caught up in something we don't understand. And now, we have no choice but to face it. Elise felt her stomach twist. What does that mean for us? What does it mean for... It means, Jonah interrupted, his eyes dark, that we're out of options. We either fight back together or we let it consume us. But I don't know if we can win this one. I don't know if we can survive it. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Elise's heart ached, torn between the man she loved and the grim reality of their situation. Jonah had always been her anchor, but now even he seemed uncertain. The world around them had shifted, and the future she had imagined for them was, now, a fragile, fading illusion. For the first time, Elise realized that the truth wasn't enough to save them. It wasn't enough to fix what had been broken, and whatever choice they made now would carry consequences neither of them could fully comprehend. I love you, she whispered, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. But I don't know if that's enough anymore. Jonah didn't answer right away. He only stared at her, the weight of their reality pressing down on him, and for a moment, neither of them knew where they went from here. The silence between them lingered, a heavy, suffocating weight. Jonah stood just a few feet away, his eyes lost somewhere between her and the storm raging inside him. Elise watched him, her heart aching with the words she hadn't said, the ones that might make it all make sense, or destroy everything they had left. Jonah's voice broke the silence, low and raw. I don't know what to do, Elise. I don't know how we get out of this. Elise looked down at her hands, fingers twisting nervously. The fear inside her had been there for months now, maybe longer. It was the kind of fear that sat in the pit of her stomach, gnawing away at her sanity, making it impossible to sleep, impossible to breathe without a sense that everything was slipping through her fingers. Her marriage, her future, Jonah. Everything she thought was solid had become a fragile house of cards. "I don't know either," she whispered, the admission hanging in the air like a death sentence. She wanted to reach for him, to pull him back, to fix everything, but she couldn't. She couldn't fix the lies, the secrets, the things they'd done to each other. She had tried, and in doing so, she'd only pushed him further away. Her betrayal, the affair, the lies, had cracked the foundation they'd built together. But Daniel's involvement, Jonah's discovery of the deeper, more dangerous game they were caught in, that was something else entirely. It wasn't just about trust. It was about survival. "I thought we could rebuild," Jonah continued, his voice thick with a mixture of regret and determination. "But I'm not sure if we can anymore. I'm not sure if we even should." Elise swallowed hard, the truth of his words cutting deeper than any knife could. They had tried to salvage something from the wreckage of their marriage, but now it felt like too much was broken. And even though she wanted to believe they could fix it, she wasn't sure if either of them had the strength left to try. "Do you think we can still find a way out of this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I mean, we're not just fighting for us anymore, Jonah. We're fighting for something bigger than us, something dangerous." Jonah didn't answer immediately. He closed his eyes as if trying to block out the weight of everything they had discovered, everything they were up against. "I don't know," he murmured, finally meeting her eyes. "But I do know that I'm not letting you go through this alone." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. Her heart gave a painful, hopeful flutter. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But there was a part of her that knew, deep down, that it might already be too late. Chapter 19. The Path Forward. The next few days passed in a blur. Jonah spent hours investigating Daniel's network, trying to piece together the dangerous web they had found themselves entangled in. Elise, too, tried to understand how everything had spiraled out of control, what role she had played in the destruction of their lives. Every conversation between them felt like a step closer to the edge. Yet they both clung to the fragile hope that somehow they could find a way back from this. But the questions loomed larger than the answers they were finding. One evening, Jonah sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and notes, his laptop open in front of him. Elise watched him from the doorway, her hands still cold from the evening air. She wasn't sure how much longer they could keep going like this. The distance between them was widening, and the emotional toll was starting to show. Jonah looked up, catching her gaze. "We're in over our heads, Elise. If we keep going down this path, there's no turning back." "I know," she replied quietly, stepping into the room. "But we don't have much choice, do we?" Jonah let out a bitter laugh, though it lacked any real humor. Choice. That's the word, isn't it? It feels like we lost ours the moment we got tangled up in all this. They both fell silent again, the weight of everything pressing on their shoulders. Elise wasn't sure if they were still talking about Daniel or about their marriage. Maybe it was both. Maybe they had already lost everything, and now they were just waiting for the inevitable. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonah's eyes were distant, his mind far away. "I don't know. We keep fighting, I guess. We find out who's behind all this, who else is pulling the strings. Maybe we can expose it. Maybe we can get out of this with our lives intact." "But not our marriage," Elise said softly, unable to stop herself. Jonah met her gaze, the rawness in his eyes reflecting everything that had been broken between them. "I don't know if we can fix this, Elise. I don't know if we should." The words were like a final blow, but they were the truth. And the truth was, neither of them knew how to move forward from here. Their lives had become a tangled mess of lies, betrayal, and moral ambiguity, and they were both too lost in it to find their way back to who they used to be. Chapter 20. The Final Decision. It was late one night when Elise found herself standing at the edge of a precipice, staring into the abyss of their fractured future. Jonah was asleep in their bed, his chest rising and falling with the deep, even breaths of someone who had given up trying to solve the puzzle. He had decided that he would fight, yes, but the weight of the battle had begun to crush him. The thought that he might lose her, lose everything, was gnawing at him. She wasn't sure what made her do it, whether it was desperation or some last attempt to reclaim a piece of herself. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew she shouldn't. Daniel's voice came through on the other end. "I knew you'd call. You always do when you've run out of options." "Elise." He said her name like a promise, or maybe a threat. "I'm giving you a chance here, a chance to stop running, to stop fighting. Come to me. Together we can fix this. I'll help you. I can make everything right." The temptation was there. She could feel it clawing at her insides, but when she closed her eyes, she saw Jonah's face, his raw honesty, his pain. She thought about the life they could have, the one they had built, and how it felt to lose it. "I can't," she whispered. Daniel's laugh was low, almost disappointed. "You'll regret this, Elise. You'll see." She hung up the phone. Before she could hear anything more, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of clarity wash over her. But it was fleeting. As the sun began to rise, Elise knew she was standing at the crossroads of something irreversible. Whether they would fall into the darkness of their choices or fight their way into something new, something fragile, uncertain, was a question neither of them had an answer to. Epilogue. A future unwritten. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet decisions, whispered conversations, and too many unspoken words. Jonah and Elise didn't know what the future held, only that they had both decided to face it together, whatever it might be. The truth and the lies would follow them. But for the first time in a long while, they chose to confront it. And in that choice, perhaps, lay the smallest seed of hope. But as they turned away from the wreckage of their past, neither of them knew if they were walking toward healing or further into the shadows. The only certainty was that they couldn't go back. Not anymore. Months passed since Elise had made her call to Daniel, since Jonah and she had decided to face the wreckage together. The tension had subsided, but the scars, though healing, remained fresh in ways they couldn't always articulate. Their life, the one they had once known and thought unshakable, had become an intricate dance of measured steps, fragile moments, and quiet doubts. Jonah had returned to his work, throwing himself into it with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. The investigation into Daniel's connections and the possible network of threats remained unfinished. He had received anonymous warnings, emails, phone calls, even an unsettling visit at work, but he hadn't told Elise about all of it. He knew better now. She couldn't carry the weight of that as well. Elise, meanwhile, had been seeing a therapist. It was her own attempt to make sense of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the affair, the lies. She was trying to untangle the twisted knots in her mind, to find some semblance of who she had been before all of this had taken root. The therapy sessions were helping, in their way, but she knew that even they couldn't erase the painful truth that lingered just beneath the surface. One evening, Jonah came home later than usual, his face grim. Elise was sitting in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand. Her gaze flicked toward him, noting the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw. She had seen that look too many times in the past few months, like he was carrying the weight of something far heavier than she knew. "Did you find something?" she asked quietly. Jonah didn't answer right away. He set his briefcase on the table, his fingers tapping on it absent-mindedly. He looked at her, then away. before his gaze returned to hers. "There's something more," he said, his voice low, almost as though he were deciding whether to speak the words at all. Elise's heart stilled in her chest. She placed the wine, glass down carefully, as if afraid the sound of it touching the table would break the fragile moment between them. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight. "I've found out more about Daniel's connections," Jonah said, his tone betraying the exhaustion that had crept into his every word. "But it's not just him. Someone else is involved. Someone much closer than I thought." Her stomach clenched at the mention of someone closer. She immediately thought of their friends, their circle of acquaintances. She had feared this for so long, but hearing Jonah say it aloud made it real. "Who?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Jonah took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "It's Richard, your old colleague, the one you've been working with all this time." Elise froze. She stared at Jonah as if he had just told her that the sky was falling. Richard, her confidant, the one person she thought she could trust. "I don't understand," she murmured, the words thick in her throat. "Richard? How?" "I don't have all the details yet," Jonah said, pacing slightly now, the weight of the revelation clearly too much for him. "But everything points back to him. Daniel was involved in something bigger than just his business dealings, something that's been running under the radar for years, and Richard is more involved in it than you realize. I don't think he was ever really your friend, Elise." The blood drained from her face as her mind raced, replaying every interaction she had ever had with Richard. She thought of the long lunches, the late-night emails, the times when he had been the one to comfort her when Jonah pulled away or when her frustration bubbled over. She thought of the way Richard's eyes had softened whenever she shared her doubts, her insecurities, and how those moments of connection had seemed so genuine. "I never wanted you to be right," Jonah said, his voice barely a rasp. "But it's not just about the affair anymore. This goes beyond us." Elise's thoughts swirled, the room around her starting to feel smaller. The idea that Richard had been orchestrating something behind her back, using their relationship to manipulate her into trusting him, filled her with an anger so intense she couldn't breathe. "Do you think he was involved in everything?" she asked, her voice sharp. "The affair? The lies? Did he know about it?" Jonah shook his head slowly. "I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out. I'm not letting this go." Elise's heart pounded. She felt the rush of betrayal, but it wasn't just because of Richard's involvement. It was because she had been so blind, so lost in her own pain that she had let him in. She had trusted him. "I have to talk to him," Elise said, standing abruptly. She was shaking now, both from fear and from something else, a dangerous mix of adrenaline and rage. "No," Jonah said quickly, grabbing her arm. "Not yet. Not like this." Her gaze locked with his, and for a moment it felt like they were two strangers, their bond almost non-existent. Elise pulled her arm out of his grip, her eyes cold. "I have to," she repeated, her voice hard now. "I need to know if he was part of this, Jonah. If he's been lying to me all this time." Jonah watched her, his face torn. "I know you're angry, but don't make this worse. Please." Her chest tightened as she met his gaze, her emotions too raw to hide anymore. "I have to know, and if it means losing everything again, so be it." Chapter 22. Confrontation. The next day, Elise met Richard at a cafe, the weight of what she was about to do pressing heavily on her shoulders. She sat across from him, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. Richard was late, as usual, but she wasn't sure if it was intentional or just another one of his many small inconsistencies that had started to feel like red flags. When he arrived, he was his usual charming self, his smile disarming, his voice smooth, but something about the way he looked at her felt different this time. colder, more calculated. "Elise," he said, sitting down, "I didn't expect to see you here. Everything okay?" She studied him, her gaze unwavering. "No, Richard, it's not okay." His smile faltered for a brief moment before he masked it with a practiced expression of concern. "What's wrong? You're scaring me a little." "I know about you." "And Daniel," she said, her voice tight but steady. "I know you've been involved in this, in everything." His face shifted in an instant, the charm fading to something darker. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No more lies, Richard," Elise said, leaning forward. "I'm done with the games. Did you help Daniel orchestrate all of this? Did you know what was going on?" For a moment, Richard's eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe, or guilt, but it was gone before she could make sense of it. "I never meant for it to get this far," Richard said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I didn't have a choice." "You don't understand, Elise. I never had a choice." The words hit her like a slap in the face. She had thought she was prepared for whatever he was going to say, but she hadn't expected this kind of confession. "You're telling me you were involved in all of it and you didn't have a choice?" she asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "You didn't have a choice? You could have walked away. You could have told me the truth from the beginning." Richard's gaze dropped. To the table, his expression now almost pitiful. "I tried, Elise. I really did. But it was too late. And by then, I couldn't pull away." Elise stood up abruptly, the weight of everything crashing down on her. The tears she had held back for so long finally started to spill. "I trusted you," she said, her voice breaking. "And you—" She didn't finish. She couldn't. She turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Richard's confused stare behind. As she stepped into the cool air outside, Elise realized that she was no longer sure what would come next. But she did know one thing. The path to forgiveness, whether for Richard, for Jonah, or even for herself, had just become a lot harder, and she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to keep walking it. Elise spent the next few days in a daze, her mind trying to process the confrontation with Richard. But it felt as though the walls of her life had shifted. Jonah had sensed something had changed in her, but he didn't press her. He gave her space, as much space as he could. Though he couldn't stop checking his phone, couldn't stop glancing at her when she least expected it. There was a coldness in her eyes now, a distance he wasn't sure how to bridge. Their house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a maze, each room another obstacle, every conversation strained, every moment laced with the tension of unspoken words. Jonah wanted to reach out, to ask her how she was, but he didn't. He was too afraid of hearing that it was too late, that it had all gone too far. What was left between them? At dinner that evening, the silence was deafening. Jonah had prepared. A simple meal, chicken and vegetables, their usual routine, but it felt like a charade. He tried to catch her eye, but Elise only picked at her plate, her thoughts somewhere far away. "Elise," Jonah began softly, his voice fragile in the weight of the quiet. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer right away, but finally she looked up at him, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes, those eyes that once held so much warmth, now seemed distant. "No, Jonah. I'm not okay." His heart tightened in his chest. "Do you want to talk about it?" She let out a breath, almost like a laugh, but there was nothing humorous about it. "I don't know if I even know where to start anymore." Jonah placed his fork down and leaned forward, his gaze intense. "We can start wherever you want. We don't have to keep pretending, Elise." Her eyes shifted away, staring out the window. The autumn air outside had turned chilly, but the warmth in the house seemed to be fading by the second. "I confronted Richard," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "I know everything." Jonah froze, his body stiffening as the realization of her words hit him. He could feel the air leave his lungs as his pulse quickened. He didn't know what to say. For a moment, he thought of apologizing, of saying something to make it right, but the words wouldn't come. They were buried too deep. "I know you didn't want me to," she continued, her voice tight with emotion. "But I had to. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep living in the lies." Jonah reached for her hand instinctively, but she pulled it back before he could make contact. The rejection stung more than he expected. "Elise," he began, but she cut him off. "No, don't. Don't do this now." She looked at him, her face a mix of hurt and exhaustion. "You've been doing this for months, Jonah. Hiding. Pretending. Like nothing happened. Like I'm supposed to just forget." He felt his chest tighten. "I never wanted you to forget. I wanted us to move forward. But I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know how to fix us." Her eyes filled with tears that she fought to keep back. "I don't know if we can, Jonah. I don't know if we can move forward from this. It's too much." The words hit him like a punch, knocking the air out of his lungs. The thought of losing her, of everything they had built together unraveling, was unbearable. But he had always known, deep down, that this moment would come. He had hoped for something else, for some miracle to happen, for them to find their way back. But now, standing here, face to face with the consequences of his actions, Jonah realized that hope alone wasn't enough. "You're right," he said finally, his voice low, defeated. "It's too much. But I can't let you go. Elise, I don't know how to do this without you." Elise stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back so violently that it scraped against the floor. "I can't keep doing this, Jonah. I can't keep pretending I'm okay. I don't even know who I am anymore. I thought I knew what I wanted, but now I'm not so sure." She walked away from the table, pacing to the other side of the room. Jonah watched her, feeling the distance between them grow with every step she took. There was nothing he could say now. No magic words to fix this. He had betrayed her in ways he could never undo, and now it was too late. After a long moment, Elise turned back to face him. Her voice when she spoke was barely audible. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Jonah. I don't know if I ever will." The words felt like they were ripping him apart, but he nodded, the sting of her truth, impossible to deny. "I understand." She looked at him one last time before she walked out of the room, leaving him there, alone in the silence. He didn't follow her. He didn't know what he would say. It wasn't the first time in the last few months that he had felt the weight of everything crashing down, but it felt different now. It felt final. Chapter 24. The Quiet. Before the storm, the days that followed were heavy with silence, but they also marked a turning point. Elise had retreated into herself, and Jonah gave her the space she so desperately needed. He had no idea what was going to happen, no idea if they were even going to make it through this. Elise spent her days at work, her nights empty of the usual comfort she had once found in Jonah's company. She was avoiding Richard's calls, avoiding him altogether, and yet she knew he would eventually show up at her door. He had always been persistent, always knowing exactly how to get under her skin, but she wasn't sure if she cared anymore. The truth had gutted her. Richard's betrayal, coupled with Jonah's, had left her questioning everything she had ever known about trust. Could she ever forgive them? Could she ever rebuild her sense of self after all that had happened? Jonah, on the other hand, spent most of his time at work, but he found himself distracted more often than not. The haunting thought of Elise's words replayed in his mind over and over. "I don't know if I can forgive you." He wasn't sure if he could forgive himself either. The quiet between them grew unbearable. Neither of them knew how to breach the growing divide, how to undo the damage that had been done. As they both waited for the inevitable, whether it was forgiveness, separation, or some unknown resolution, The future loomed ahead, uncertain and filled with a tension that neither could escape. And somewhere in that silence, a question remained unanswered. Could they rebuild? Or had everything been irreparably broken? Elisa's phone buzzed. Richard's name flashed across the screen. She hesitated for a moment before swiping the screen to accept the call.